The vast expanse of the North African desert stretches endlessly under a silent, watchful sky. Dunes roll into the distance, sculpted by wind into forms that shift with the passing hours, each grain of sand a testament to immeasurable time. In this landscape of profound quietude, where the horizon blends seamlessly with the heavens, a figure emerged whose name became inextricably linked with its sun-drenched, desolate beauty. Erwin Rommel, a name that evokes images of swift movement across this ancient terrain, of strategic acumen forged in the crucible of sand and heat. He is often remembered as the Desert Fox, a commander whose exploits in this unique theatre of war captured the attention of the world. Yet the popular image, often simplified, often conceals a life of considerable depth and a career shaped by forces far beyond the immediate tactical challenges of the battlefield. Beneath the surface of the legend lies the story of an individual, from his formative years in a quiet corner of Württemberg, through the crucible of 2 world wars, to his ultimate tragic end. This narrative will unfold slowly, deliberately, much like the gradual shift of desert sands, revealing the layers of a life lived amidst immense historical upheaval. Our purpose here is not to dramatize nor to speculate, but to observe, to present the factual journey of Erwin Rommel with a calm and steady hand, allowing his story to unfold in its own measured pace. We will explore his origins, his early military experiences, his theoretical contributions, and the practical application of his command, and always striving for historical accuracy and a meditative stillness in our recounting. Our journey into the life of Erwin Rommel begins not amidst the vast sun-baked landscapes of North Africa, but in a quieter, more temperate setting, the town of Heidenheim an der Brenz, nestled in the southern German state of Württemberg. It was here, on the 15th day of November in the year 1891, that Rommel first entered the world. Heidenheim, at the close of the 19th century, was a provincial town, characterized by its measured pace and established rhythms. Life unfolded with a certain predictability, far removed from the bustling metropolises that were beginning to define modern Germany. The air was often filled with the gentle sounds of daily life, the distant hum of nascent industry, and the quiet murmur of the Brenz River. It was a place where tradition held sway, and the cycles of nature and community life provided a stable, if unassuming, foundation. This period in Germany was one of profound transformation, a nation confidently asserting its place on the global stage. Industrialization was steadily progressing, bringing with it new technologies and a burgeoning sense of national pride following the unification of 1871. Yet, for many, particularly in regions like Württemberg, daily existence remained deeply rooted in conservative values, local customs, and a strong sense of duty. The grand narratives of imperial expansion and scientific advancement were often experienced indirectly, filtered through the lens of local news and community conversation. It was within this specific confluence of rising national ambition and persistent provincial calm that the early years of Erwin Rommel would unfold, shaping the groundwork for the path he would eventually choose. The environment into which Erwin Rommel was born was one of intellectual engagement and civic responsibility, largely defined by his family's standing within the community. His father, also named Erwin Rommel, held the respected position of a school principal. This was a profession that carried significant weight in late 19th century Germany, embodying the nation's high regard for education and structured learning. The elder Rommel was known for his calm demeanour and meticulous approach, qualities that would subtly echo in his son's later life. His mother, Helene Luz, contributed another layer of influence to this stable household. She was the daughter of a prominent local dignitary, an individual whose social standing would have further cemented the family's respected position within Heidenheim. This lineage provided a secure middle-class upbringing, a foundation free from the anxieties of economic instability that often characterized the era. Within this familial framework, certain values were not merely taught, but lived. Discipline was a natural byproduct of a principal's household, manifested in ordered routines and an expectation of thoroughness. Education was paramount, not just as a means to an end, but as an inherent good, fostering intellectual curiosity and a systematic way of thinking. Beyond academic pursuits, there was an unspoken emphasis on duty to family, to community, and to the emerging nation. These were not abstract concepts, but rather the practical principles that guided daily interactions and shaped the worldview of the young Rommel. This stable, disciplined, and intellectually inclined environment provided the initial scaffolding upon which his character and future ambitions would begin to form. As a child, Erwin Rommel exhibited a temperament that was perhaps less outwardly demonstrative and more inwardly focused, a characteristic that would persist throughout his life. He was not described as a particularly boisterous or attention-seeking boy, but rather as one who processed the world with a quiet intensity. His early years were marked by a keen observational sense, a habit of taking in his surroundings and analysing them rather than simply reacting. From a young age, Rommel displayed a pronounced inclination towards practical endeavours. His interests gravitated towards the tangible and the mechanical, hinting at an innate engineering mind. He found fascination in how things worked, often dismantling and reassembling objects to understand their internal mechanisms. This hands-on approach suggested a mind that preferred direct engagement with problems and sought functional solutions. Cycling became another significant early interest, offering both a physical outlet and a connection to the practical world of mechanics. The bicycle, a marvel of late 19th century engineering, allowed for exploration and independence. Rommel's enjoyment of cycling underscored an active disposition, a preference for movement and the open air, which contrasted with the more sedentary academic pursuits that might have been expected from a principal's son. These long rides through the countryside around Heidenheim fostered a sense of self-reliance and an appreciation for navigating varied terrain. These early passions, though seemingly simple, provided a glimpse into the core traits that would define the man: the determination required to master a mechanical problem, the quiet persistence of a long bicycle journey, and the observant nature that preceded action, all suggested a personality geared towards efficiency, practical application, and a quiet, unyielding resolve. These were the nascent expressions of a mind that would later become synonymous with tactical innovation and decisive action. Despite the later prominence of his military career, Erwin Rommel's initial aspirations did not exclusively point towards the armed forces. In his youth, a different professional path held considerable appeal, one that aligned closely with his innate practical inclinations and his fascination with mechanical workings. Rommel seriously considered a future in engineering. This inclination towards engineering was a natural extension of his childhood interests. The methodical dismantling and reassembling of objects, his curiosity about internal mechanisms, and his appreciation for the functional design of things like bicycles all indicated a mind suited to the challenges of engineering. It was a profession that promised tangible results, demanding logical thought, problem-solving skills, and direct engagement with the physical world, attributes that resonated deeply with Rommel's temperament. The field of engineering, particularly in the burgeoning industrial landscape of early 20th century Germany, offered a respectable and intellectually stimulating career. It would have provided an avenue for his pragmatic nature, allowing him to apply his observational skills and his determination to concrete projects. This initial vocational consideration highlights a fundamental aspect of Rommel's character, a preference for understanding systems, for constructing solutions, and for seeing ideas translated into practical realities. This early inclination stands in gentle contrast to the path he ultimately chose. While the military would later provide its own set of complex problems and opportunities for innovation, the initial pull towards engineering underscores that his pragmatic and problem-solving mind was not singularly predisposed to warfare. It suggests a broader intellectual curiosity and a capacity for strategic thinking that could have found expression in various demanding fields had circumstances unfolded differently. The decision to pursue a military career would arrive later, influenced by a confluence of factors diverting him from the blueprints and workshops he might otherwise have embraced. The path not taken, that of engineering, eventually yielded to another, deeply ingrained in the societal fabric of Imperial Germany. In July 1910, at the age of 18, Erwin Rommel made the pivotal decision to join the army. This choice, while significant for his personal trajectory, was a common and often expected step for young men of his social standing during that era. For many, military service offered a clear and respected career path, imbued with a sense of national duty and personal discipline. It provided a structured environment, a reliable income, and a distinct purpose at a time when Germany was a rapidly modernizing nation with a strong martial tradition. For a young man like Rommel, who valued order, practicality, and challenge, the army presented an attractive proposition, offering stability and a defined role within society. He entered as an officer cadet, or Fahnenjunker, seeking to become an officer. This entry point was crucial, signifying not merely enlistment, but an aspiration for leadership and intellectual engagement within the military hierarchy. His initial posting was to the 124th Württemberg Infantry Regiment, stationed in Weingarten. This regiment, known as König Wilhelm I, was part of the 13th Royal Württemberg Corps. Joining this particular unit placed Rommel within a specific regional tradition, linking him to the military heritage of his home state. The atmosphere within such a regiment would have been one of strict discipline, rigorous training, and a strong emphasis on camaraderie. It was an environment designed to forge young men into effective soldiers and future leaders, instilling values of obedience, initiative, and physical endurance. For Rommel, the call to service was not merely an act of enlistment. It was an entry into a world that would profoundly shape his character and destiny. The uniform, the drills, the studies, and the camaraderie of the 124th Württemberg Infantry Regiment became the initial crucible in which his formidable talents would begin to be refined, diverting him from the drawing board of an engineer to the parade ground of a future officer. After his initial entry into the 124th Württemberg Infantry Regiment, Erwin Rommel's journey toward becoming an officer led him to a more specialized institution. In March 1911, he was sent to the Royal Officer Cadet School in Danzig, a prestigious academy designed to mold aspiring young men into the disciplined leaders of the Imperial German Army. The training at Danzig was rigorous and comprehensive, encompassing both the theoretical and practical aspects of military command. Days were structured around intense physical conditioning, precise drill maneuvers, and extensive academic study. Cadets were immersed in the principles of military strategy, tactics, and logistics, learning the intricacies of troop movement, battlefield organization, and the effective deployment of resources. The curriculum also included subjects like military history, geography, and engineering, providing a broad intellectual foundation for future officers. A central tenet of the school's philosophy was the cultivation of unwavering discipline. Every aspect of a cadet's life, from their personal appearance to their punctuality and adherence to regulations, was meticulously scrutinized. This strict regimen was not merely for conformity, It was intended to instill the self-control, mental fortitude, and attention to detail deemed essential for effective leadership under pressure. Leadership development was another paramount focus. Cadets were taught to command with authority, to inspire confidence in their subordinates, and to make decisive judgments. The training emphasized not only giving orders, but also understanding the responsibility that accompanied them. Rommel, with his inherently practical and observant nature, would have absorbed these lessons thoroughly, finding resonance with the systematic approach to problem-solving and the emphasis on clear, effective action. This period at the Royal Officer Cadet School was instrumental in shaping Rommel's foundational military understanding and character. It honed his innate abilities, providing him with a robust framework of knowledge and discipline that would serve as the bedrock for his future career. Where the quiet determination observed in his childhood was now being channeled and refined within the structured environment of a professional military institution, preparing him for the challenges that lay ahead. Amidst the demanding regimen of military training and the pursuit of an officer's commission, Erwin Rommel's personal life began to unfold in a quiet yet significant way. It was during his time in Danzig, while attending the Royal Officer Cadet School, that he encountered Lucy Maria Mollin. This meeting marked the beginning of a profound personal connection that would endure throughout his life, offering a glimpse into the private world of a man whose public persona would later become synonymous with military prowess. Lucy Maria Mollin was a young woman from a cultured background, possessing an artistic sensibility and a calm demeanour. Their initial interactions would have been characterized by the measured formality of the era, gradually blossoming into a deeper understanding. For Rommel, whose life was increasingly defined by the strictures of military service, Lucy represented a grounding presence, a connection to a world beyond the barracks and parade grounds. Their relationship developed steadily, reflecting a quiet affection and mutual respect. While the specifics of their courtship are not extensively documented in the grand narratives of military history, the fact of their enduring bond speaks volumes. It illustrates that even within the focused trajectory of an aspiring officer, the human need for companionship and emotional connection remained a vital element, and this gentle unfolding of personal attachment stands in contrast to the rigorous, often impersonal demands of his military training, providing a humanizing counterpoint to the disciplined path he had chosen. This early romantic connection to Lucy Maria Mollin would later culminate in marriage, establishing a stable domestic foundation that would support Rommel through the tumultuous years to come. It reveals a dimension of his character that existed alongside his military ambitions, a capacity for quiet devotion and the cultivation of a private world. This personal relationship would become a constant in his life, offering solace and understanding, far removed from the strategic complexities of the battlefield. It paints a picture of a young man not solely defined by his uniform, but also by the tender beginnings of a lifelong partnership. As Erwin Rommel navigated the early stages of his military education and personal life, the larger European continent was subtly, yet inexorably, shifting towards a precipice. The early years of the 20th century were a period of profound transformation, characterized by a complex interplay of national ambitions, imperial rivalries, and a rapidly evolving industrial landscape. Beneath the veneer of Belle Epoque tranquility, currents of tension were steadily gathering strength. Across Europe, a delicate and intricate web of alliances had been woven, initially conceived as deterrents to conflict, but paradoxically creating conditions where a localized dispute could rapidly escalate. The Triple Entente, comprising France, Russia, and Great Britain, stood in opposition to the Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. These blocs, formed over decades, were designed to balance power, yet they also fostered a sense of mutual suspicion and an arms race that saw nations investing heavily in their military capabilities. Nationalism, a potent force across the continent, fueled a sense of destiny and superiority in many nations, often leading to territorial disputes and a fierce competition for colonial possessions. Economic rivalry, particularly between an ascendant Germany and the established industrial power of Great Britain, further exacerbated these underlying frictions. Each nation, convinced of its own strategic imperatives, pursued policies that often clashed with the interests of its neighbours. The atmosphere was charged with a quiet anticipation, a sense that the established order was fragile. Military planners across Europe diligently prepared for various contingencies, often operating under the assumption that a major conflict, while undesirable, was an increasingly plausible outcome. The development of elaborate mobilization schedules and strategic doctrines became paramount. This period, therefore, was one of escalating tensions, where political leaders and military strategists alike watched with growing apprehension as the continent drifted towards an unknown and potentially devastating future. The stage was being set for a global upheaval that would profoundly alter the lives of individuals like Rommel and reshape the course of the 20th century. Within the broader European context of escalating tensions, Imperial Germany harboured its own distinct set of aspirations, deeply rooted in a desire for greater international influence and recognition. Under the leadership of Kaiser Wilhelm II, Germany sought what was famously termed a place in the sun, reflecting a national ambition to expand its colonial empire, secure its economic interests, and assert its status as a major global power. This ambition was a powerful driver of foreign policy and national sentiment. To support these aims, Imperial Germany embarked upon a significant and sustained military build-up. The most prominent aspect of this was the expansion of its navy, challenging Britain's long-standing naval supremacy. This naval race, championed by figures like Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz, was seen as essential for protecting Germany's burgeoning overseas trade and projecting its power globally. Concurrently, the German army, already a formidable force, continued to modernize and expand, becoming a highly trained and well-equipped fighting machine. Military service was deeply ingrained in society, and the armed forces enjoyed immense prestige. This period was also characterized by a pervasive and fervent nationalist sentiment. German identity was strongly linked to its military prowess, industrial strength, and cultural achievements. Propaganda and education systems instilled a deep sense of patriotism and loyalty to the Kaiser and the Reich. There was a widespread belief in Germany's unique destiny and its right to a more prominent role on the world stage. This nationalistic fervour, while unifying internally, also contributed to a certain inflexibility in foreign policy and an unwillingness to compromise on perceived national interests. The combination of a powerful military, an assertive foreign policy, and a deeply nationalistic populace created a volatile situation, setting the stage for the immense conflict that would soon engulf Europe and define the early military career of young officers like Erwin Rommel. The summer of 1914 brought a deceptive calm across Europe, even as the intricate web of alliances and antagonisms tightened around the continent. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo acted as the spark, yet the underlying causes of the impending conflagration had been building for decades. One by one, the great powers of Europe activated their mobilization plans, each step a further commitment to a path from which retreat became increasingly difficult. The declarations of war, though momentous, often arrived with a sense of grim inevitability rather than sudden shock, a culmination of long-simmering tensions. For a young officer like Erwin Rommel, then a lieutenant in the 124th, 6th Württemberg Infantry Regiment, the outbreak of war would have been perceived through a distinct lens. It was not merely a political event, but the ultimate professional proving ground. His years of rigorous training, the theoretical exercises, and the disciplined drills all pointed towards this moment. The prevailing military culture idealized courage, initiative, and the pursuit of honor on the battlefield. War was presented as an opportunity for distinction, a chance to demonstrate one's skill, leadership, and personal bravery. The widespread sentiment among many junior officers and soldiers was one of enthusiastic patriotism, as if fueled by nationalist narratives and a belief in a swift victory. There was an eagerness to participate, to contribute to the nation's cause. For Rommel, with his practical mind and meticulous approach to military matters, this was the moment to apply everything he'd learned, to test his capabilities under the most extreme conditions. The abstract concepts of strategy and tactics would now become concrete realities, demanding immediate decisions and decisive action. The impending conflict represented not just a historical turning point for nations, but a profound personal turning point for individuals like Rommel, whose futures would be irrevocably shaped by the crucible of the Great War. Rommel's first encounters with actual combat unfolded on the Western Front, a landscape that quickly transformed into a static, a brutal stalemate unlike any conflict that had preceded it. The initial rapid maneuvers of the war soon gave way to entrenched positions, a vast network of trenches stretching across northern France and Belgium. Here, the reality of modern warfare became starkly clear. Machine guns, artillery bombardments, and barbed wire created an environment of constant peril and grinding attrition. For a young officer, the learning curve was exceptionally steep and unforgiving. Theoretical training could not fully prepare one for the psychological and physical demands of trench warfare. Rommel, like many others, had to adapt rapidly to the omnipresent threat of death, the disorienting noise of shell fire, and the claustrophobia of the dugouts. The challenges were immense, maintaining morale among his men, navigating the treacherous terrain under fire, and making instantaneous tactical decisions in the face of chaos. Yet, even in these early harrowing experiences, Rommel began to exhibit traits that would later define his command style. He displayed a notable degree of initiative, often taking personal risks to scout enemy positions or lead small aggressive patrols. His bravery was evident, not in reckless disregard for danger, but in a calculated willingness to place himself at the forefront of action when necessary. He demonstrated a keen ability to quickly assess situations, identify vulnerabilities, and exploit them. These initial forays into combat, characterized by a direct, hands-on approach and a developing tactical acumen, set him apart. The static, defensive nature of the Western Front would paradoxically become a crucible for Rommel, and forging a commander who understood the importance of movement, surprise, and aggressive action, even as he endured the grim realities of positional warfare. Amidst the grim attrition of the Western Front, Rommel began to hone a distinct tactical approach. He quickly recognized the futility of frontal assaults against entrenched positions, a common and costly tactic of the era. Instead, he gravitated towards methods that emphasized surprise and penetration. Specific instances from this period highlight his nascent tactical brilliance. For example, he frequently employed what would later be understood as early forms of infiltration tactics. Rather than waiting for large-scale bombardments and massed attacks, Rommel would lead small, highly mobile detachments, often under the cover of darkness or fog, to probe enemy lines. He sought out weak points, gaps between strongholds, or poorly defended sectors, aiming to bypass direct confrontation and strike behind enemy forward positions. This approach was audacious for the time, demanding exceptional courage and initiative from both the leader and his men. Rommel himself consistently led from the front, a characteristic that would remain with him throughout his career. This direct involvement allowed him to personally observe the terrain, the enemy's dispositions, and the psychological state of his own troops. His observational skills were particularly acute. He possessed an innate ability to read the battlefield, discerning patterns in enemy patrols, the placement of machine gun nests, or the telltale signs of recent activity. This detailed perception, combined with a practical imagination, enabled him to devise impromptu plans that often caught the enemy off guard. In the chaotic environment of trench warfare, where visibility was often limited and information scarce, Rommel's capacity to synthesize disparate observations into actionable intelligence provided a distinct advantage. These early experiences, marked by his pioneering use of infiltration and his unwavering presence at the spearhead of his units, laid a foundational layer for the sophisticated tactical thinking he would later develop. Following his formative experiences on the Western Front, Rommel's military journey took him to a vastly different theatre of war, the Romanian campaign, which unfolded in 1916 and 1917. This shift presented an entirely new set of environmental and strategic challenges. The static, dug-in warfare of the Western Front, now characterised by its intricate trench systems and the slow, grinding pace of attrition, contrasted sharply with the fluid and mountainous terrain of Romania. Here, the landscape was dominated by the Carpathian Mountains, dense forests and winding river valleys. Movement was often arduous, supply lines stretched, and the enemy presented itself in a less predictable manner. This environment demanded a different kind of warfare, one focused on manoeuvre, rapid deployment, and the ability to exploit natural cover and concealed approaches. Rommel's earlier inclinations towards movement and surprise found a more natural expression in this dynamic setting. He adapted his leadership style to suit these conditions, emphasizing speed and independent action among his subunits. Now, the vastness of the terrain often meant that commanders had to make decisions with limited oversight, relying on their initiative and the training of their men. Rommel excelled in this atmosphere. He continued to lead from the very front, often at the head of his company, navigating difficult mountain passes and engaging in close-quarters combat. His ability to read the challenging topography and anticipate enemy movements became particularly pronounced. He learned to leverage the terrain for concealment and surprise, using the natural features to mask his unit's advances and achieve local numerical superiority at critical points. The Romanian campaign thus served as a significant proving ground, solidifying Rommel's adaptive leadership and his preference for aggressive, mobile operations over static defence. The rugged environment of the Carpathian Mountains provided a distinct theatre for Rommel to refine his tactical approaches. It was here that his methods began to coalesce into what would later be informally termed the Rommel trick. This approach was not a single tactic, but rather a combination of principles centred on achieving disproportionate results against numerically superior forces through psychological disorientation and aggressive, rapid movement. A notable illustration of these methods occurred during the Battle of Caporetto in October 1917, a major engagement on the Austro-Italian front. Rommel, then a lieutenant leading a company of the Württemberg Mountain Battalion, was tasked with penetrating Italian lines in extremely difficult mountainous terrain. His objective was often to capture fortified positions that were considered formidable. He achieved his successes by employing a systematic combination of speed, surprise, and a keen understanding of human psychology in combat. Instead of launching frontal assaults, which were costly and often futile in mountain warfare, Rommel would lead his men on rapid, often nocturnal infiltrations through seemingly impassable areas. They would bypass strong points, appearing unexpectedly in the enemy's rear or flank. This sudden appearance often created a profound sense of confusion and panic among the defending forces, who expected attacks from predictable directions. Furthermore, Rommel frequently used deceptive tactics. He would order his men to simulate a larger force than they actually were, perhaps by firing their weapons from multiple positions or creating a greater volume of noise. The sound of machine guns echoing in the mountain valleys could easily be misinterpreted as a much larger attacking force. This psychological warfare often led to the rapid surrender of Italian units, who believed themselves to be encircled or overwhelmed, even when Rommel's actual numbers were quite small. His ability to disorient and demoralize the opposition, compelling them to yield without prolonged resistance, became a hallmark of his command style during this period. Rommel's effectiveness and dedication during the First World War did not go unnoticed by the German military command. His consistent displays of initiative and personal bravery, combined with a remarkable ability to achieve objectives under challenging circumstances, led to a series of significant decorations. These awards served as quiet acknowledgements of his developing tactical genius and his unwavering commitment to his duties. Early in the war, for his actions on the Western Front, Rommel was awarded the Iron Cross Second Class. This common but respected decoration recognized bravery in combat. As his tactical skills sharpened and he led his men through increasingly complex and dangerous operations, particularly during the Romanian campaign and at Caporetto, further recognition followed. He received the Iron Cross First Class, a more prestigious award, signifying continued valour and distinguished service. These early awards underscored a pattern of consistent performance under fire, showcasing a young officer who not only understood the principles of warfare, but could also apply them with exceptional personal courage. The pinnacle of his wartime accolades arrived in December 1917, when he was awarded the Pour le Mérite. This highly coveted decoration, often referred to as the Blue Max due to its distinctive blue enamel and intricate design, was Prussia's highest military order, granted for extraordinary acts of bravery or exceptional military leadership. Rommel received it for his crucial role in the Battle of Caporetto, where his company's deep penetration into Italian lines and the capture of key positions, along with thousands of prisoners, had a decisive impact on the battle's outcome. Receiving the Pour le Mérite as a relatively junior officer was a rare distinction. It placed him among an elite group of German officers, signalling his emergence as a figure of considerable promise within the military establishment. These decorations were not merely symbols, they were tangible evidence of his proven capabilities and the high regard in which his superiors held his contributions to the war effort. They quietly affirmed his developing reputation as an officer of exceptional skill and daring. As the year 1918 drew to a close, the immense strain of the First World War finally broke the German Empire. After 4 years of relentless combat, the nation's resources were exhausted, its population weary, and its military, despite moments of brilliance, could no longer sustain the fight against an increasingly formidable coalition of adversaries. The German Spring Offensive of 1918, a final, desperate gamble, ultimately failed to achieve a decisive breakthrough, leading to a rapid deterioration of morale and capability. The armistice, signed on November 11th, 1918, marked not only the end of the conflict, but also the dramatic collapse of the imperial system that had governed Germany for decades. Emperor Wilhelm II abdicated, and the nation transitioned abruptly into a period of profound political and social upheaval. Revolutionary sentiments swept through cities, and the very fabric of German society seemed to unravel. For those who had served on the front lines, the sudden cessation of hostilities, combined with the news of defeat and internal chaos, presented a complex emotional landscape. For Erwin Rommel, the end of the Great War brought a quiet sense of duty amidst the national turmoil. Having proven himself an exceptional officer, he found himself in a defeated army, yet his personal commitment to service remained. He didn't engage in the revolutionary fervour or the political infighting that characterised much of post-war Germany. Instead, his focus remained on the pragmatic realities of the moment, maintaining order where possible, ensuring the safe demobilisation of troops, and upholding the integrity of the military institution as best he could. The experience of defeat, the dismantling of the old order, and the subsequent instability of the Weimar Republic would profoundly shape Rommel's worldview. It instilled in him a quiet determination to see his nation regain its strength, a sentiment shared by many professional soldiers of his generation. While the euphoria of victory was denied to him, the lessons of resilience, adaptation, and the enduring importance of military discipline in times of crisis were deeply ingrained. The tumultuous period following the Great War presented a unique challenge for Germany and its military. Under the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, the German armed forces were drastically curtailed. The once vast imperial army was reduced to a mere 100,000 men, known as the Reichswehr. This small professional force was strictly limited in terms of weaponry, heavy artillery, tanks and aircraft, with a general staff also prohibited. For ambitious officers like Erwin Rommel, who had distinguished themselves in combat, this new reality demanded a significant adjustment. Rommel, having proven his leadership capabilities and tactical acumen, was among the select few retained in the new army. This was not merely a matter of retaining skilled personnel. It was a deliberate effort by the Reichswehr leadership to preserve the core of military professionalism and intellectual rigour. The challenge was immense, to maintain a high standard of training and military spirit within severe constraints, all while operating in a nation grappling with economic hardship and political instability. For Rommel, the interwar years were a period of quiet, methodical development. He transitioned from the immediate demands of frontline combat to the more structured environment of military instruction and regimental command. His postings included various infantry regiments, where he focused on the practical application of tactics and the cultivation of leadership qualities in his subordinates. The limitations imposed by the treaty, rather than stifling innovation, often forced the Reichswehr to think creatively about warfare. Without access to large-scale manoeuvres or modern equipment, emphasis was placed on theoretical study, simulated exercises, and the development of highly adaptable small-unit tactics. Rommel embraced this environment. He dedicated himself to refining his understanding of infantry tactics and to the meticulous instruction of junior officers and non-commissioned officers. These years, though far removed from the battlefield heroics of the Great War, were crucial for his intellectual growth as a military theorist and educator. He observed, he taught, and he absorbed the lessons of the past, all while quietly contributing to the rebuilding of a professional, disciplined and intellectually robust German army, even within its severely restricted framework. Amidst the professional reorientation and the broader societal uncertainties of post-war Germany, Erwin Rommel's personal life found a quiet anchor. His marriage to Lucy Maria Mollin, which had taken place in 1916 amidst the chaos of the Great War, provided a consistent source of stability. Lucy, a woman of strong character and practicality, became a steadfast companion, managing their household and supporting Rommel through the frequent relocations inherent in a military career. Their relationship was marked by deep affection and mutual respect, forming the bedrock of his private world. In an era where military life often demanded significant personal sacrifice, Lucy created a domestic environment that allowed Rommel to focus on his professional duties, knowing his home life was secure. Their correspondence, though not extensive, reflects a genuine bond and a shared understanding of the demands of his chosen profession. A significant milestone in their shared life occurred in 1928, with the birth of their son Manfred. This event brought a new dimension to Rommel's personal world, adding the responsibilities and joys of fatherhood to his existence. The arrival of Manfred coincided with a period of relative calm in Germany, a brief interlude between the initial post-war turmoil and the rising political tensions of the 1930s. For Rommel, this meant that his son's early years were spent in an environment of domestic peace, distinct from the battlefields that had defined much of his own early adulthood. These years of family life with Lucy and young Manfred, he offered a counterpoint to the disciplined and often rigorous demands of military service. They provided a space for personal connection, emotional sustenance, and the simple rhythms of everyday existence. While the nation around them navigated a complex and often turbulent path, Rommel's home remained a sanctuary of order and affection. This quiet stability, characterized by the presence of his wife and son, was an essential, though often overlooked aspect of his development during the interwar period, offering a firm foundation from which he would continue to pursue his military career. Following his tenure with the 13th Infantry Regiment, Erwin Rommel embarked upon a new and profoundly influential phase of his career, that of a military instructor. This period, spent at various infantry schools, most notably the Dresden Infantry School, became a crucible for his evolving tactical ideas. It was here that he systematically articulated and refined the principles of mobile warfare and leadership that he had gleaned from his own intense experiences in the First World War. Rommel approached teaching with the same meticulousness and dedication that characterized his command on the battlefield. He was not merely a dispenser of established doctrine, but an active developer of new concepts. His lectures were known for their clarity, directness, and practical applicability. He emphasized the importance of initiative, swift decision-making, and the exploitation of surprise, often illustrating his points with vivid examples from his own wartime exploits. This direct connection between theory and personal experience resonated deeply with his students. At Dresden, Rommel's instructional methods were distinct. He moved beyond purely theoretical classroom discussions, often taking his students into the field for practical exercises. These sessions were designed to simulate real combat conditions, encouraging officers to think dynamically and adapt to changing circumstances. He fostered an environment where independent thought was valued and rigid adherence to outdated dogma was discouraged. His focus was consistently on developing leaders who could act decisively at the point of contact without waiting for explicit orders from above. This period as an instructor was crucial, not only for the officers he taught but also for Rommel himself. The act of articulating his tactical theories, explaining them and defending them in a scholastic setting, solidified his understanding and allowed him to identify the core tenets of what would later be recognized as his unique approach to warfare. He was, in essence, formalizing the Rommel trick into a teachable doctrine, preparing a new generation of officers for the challenges of future conflict. The systematic articulation of his tactical theories during his time as an instructor naturally led Erwin Rommel to consider a more permanent record of his insights. This impulse culminated in the publication of his highly influential book, Infantry Grieft an, or Infantry Attacks, in 1937. This work was not a dry theoretical treatise, but rather a vivid and practical distillation of his personal experiences and observations from the battlefields of the First World War. Infantry Attacks emerged directly from the notes and reflections Rommel had meticulously kept during his combat service, particularly his time commanding small units. It was a testament to his belief that true military wisdom stemmed from direct experience and the ability to adapt to the fluid realities of conflict. The book's genesis lay in his desire to share the hard-won lessons of infiltration tactics, the importance of initiative, and the psychological impact of surprise, which he had so effectively employed and taught. Rommel's prose in Infantry Attacks was clear, concise, and engaging, reflecting his practical temperament. He recounted specific engagements with meticulous detail, describing the terrain, the enemy's dispositions, and the precise maneuvers his units undertook. Through these narratives, he conveyed his tactical philosophy, which prioritized speed, audacious movement, and the aggressive exploitation of opportunities. The book served as a practical guide for junior officers, demonstrating how small units, led by decisive commanders, could achieve significant results against numerically superior forces. The publication of infantry attacks was a landmark event in military literature. It quickly gained widespread recognition, not only within the German army but also internationally. Its appeal lay in its grounded realism and its emphasis on practical, rather than abstract military thinking. Rommel had succeeded in transforming his raw wartime experiences into a coherent and compelling tactical doctrine, offering a blueprint for the kind of mobile, offensive warfare that would characterize future conflicts. The book cemented his reputation as an innovative military thinker, whose ideas were forged in the crucible of battle. As Erwin Rommel refined his tactical theories and saw his work published, the broader German landscape was undergoing a profound and unsettling transformation. The early 1930s witnessed the ascendance of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, commonly known as the Nazi Party, a political force that would irrevocably alter the course of the nation and the world. This period was marked by escalating political extremism, economic hardship, and a growing disillusionment with the Weimar Republic. The Nazi Party, under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, exploited these societal vulnerabilities, promising a return to national pride, economic stability, and a strong unified Germany. Their ideology, rooted in aggressive nationalism, racial purity, and anti-Semitism, resonated with a significant portion of the populace, leading to their seizure of power in January 1933. This event marked a decisive shift, replacing the fragile democratic structures with an authoritarian regime that rapidly consolidated its control over all aspects of German life. For professional soldiers like Rommel, the rise of Nazism presented a complex new reality. The military, traditionally a conservative and apolitical institution, found itself navigating a rapidly changing political environment. The Nazi regime, while initially viewed with a degree of apprehension by some officers, also offered the promise of rearmament and the restoration of military prestige, which had been curtailed by the Treaty of Versailles. Yet this appeal was significant for a professional army that had long felt constrained. Rommel, as an officer primarily focused on his craft and the development of military doctrine, remained largely detached from the overtly political machinations of the Nazi Party. His world was one of tactics, training, and the practical application of military principles. Like many professional soldiers of his era, his primary loyalty was to the state and the army itself, rather than to a particular political party. He observed the unfolding changes as a soldier, recognizing the implications for the armed forces and the opportunities for military expansion that the new regime presented. This period saw the military gradually becoming intertwined with the political ambitions of the Nazi Party, yet a relationship that would have far-reaching consequences for Rommel and for Germany. Amidst the profound political shifts occurring in Germany, Erwin Rommel maintained a steadfast focus on his professional duties as a soldier. His career trajectory during the 1930s reveals a man deeply engrossed in military craft, rather than overtly engaged with the ideological tenets of the National Socialist Party. This period was characterized by his dedication to training, instruction, and the practical application of military theory, a continuity from his earlier years as an instructor. Rommel's personal letters and professional actions from this time suggest a clear distinction between his soldierly role and the political movements reshaping the nation. and he was a product of a military tradition that emphasized loyalty to the state and the armed forces, a tradition that largely viewed direct political involvement as outside the purview of an officer. His ambition lay in excellence within his chosen profession, mastering tactics, leading men effectively, and contributing to the strength of the German army. He did not join the Nazi Party, nor did he publicly endorse its more radical policies. His published work, Infantry Attacks, for instance, is a purely military treatise, devoid of political rhetoric or ideological endorsements. It speaks to universal principles of combat and leadership, drawn from his own experiences and intended for the instruction of future officers, irrespective of the political climate. Of this detachment from overt political ideology was not uncommon among many professional officers of the Reichswehr and later the Wehrmacht. Their primary concern was the rebuilding and modernization of the German armed forces, an objective that aligned, at least superficially, with some of the Nazi regime's stated goals. For Rommel, the opportunity to train troops, develop new tactics, and eventually lead larger formations was paramount. His focus remained on the operational aspects of warfare and the enhancement of military capabilities. He was fundamentally a soldier dedicated to his craft, navigating the turbulent political waters of his time through the lens of military professionalism rather than as a party ideologue. This distinction is crucial for understanding his actions and decisions in the years that followed. In the autumn of 1938, a significant turn occurred in Erwin Rommel's career, placing him in a position of direct proximity to the highest echelons of German power. He was appointed as the commander of Adolf Hitler's headquarters escort battalion. This appointment was not a combat command in the traditional sense, but rather a role centered on security, logistics, and ceremonial duties. His new responsibilities involved ensuring the personal safety and logistical support for Hitler and his immediate staff, particularly during their movements into newly acquired territories. One of his first major assignments in this capacity was during the occupation of Czechoslovakia in March 1939. Rommel was tasked with organising the security arrangements for Hitler's personal train and motorcade as they travelled through the Sudetenland and into Prague. This required meticulous planning and coordination, drawing upon his innate organisational skills and attention to detail. The role offered Rommel an unprecedented vantage point. He was present during key moments of political and military decision-making, observing the interactions between Hitler and his senior military and political advisors. While his position was primarily protective, it afforded him insights into the inner workings of the regime that few other officers of his rank possessed. He witnessed the immediate aftermath of political manoeuvres and the direct implementation of aggressive foreign policy. This proximity continued during the invasion of Poland in September 1939. As the German forces swept across the border, Rommel and his escort battalion were responsible for securing Hitler's headquarters, which moved frequently to remain close to the advancing front. He observed the rapid execution of the blitzkrieg tactics he had long studied and advocated, albeit from a logistical and protective standpoint rather than as a direct combat leader. The experience provided him with a first-hand understanding of the scale and speed of modern warfare, and the operational demands placed upon the highest command. This period, therefore, was not merely a ceremonial interlude but a crucial phase of observation and learning, positioning Rommel at the very heart of the unfolding events. As the 1930s drew to a close and Germany embarked on its aggressive expansion, a new and revolutionary military doctrine began to define its approach to warfare: blitzkrieg, or lightning war. This concept was a radical departure from the static, as attritional warfare that characterized much of the First World War. It envisioned swift, decisive campaigns designed to overwhelm an enemy before they could effectively react or organize a robust defense. The core principles of blitzkrieg were rooted in speed, surprise, and the coordinated application of combined arms. Instead of relying on a slow grinding advance, Blitzkrieg emphasized rapid, deep penetrations into enemy territory. This was achieved through concentrated formations of tanks known as panzer divisions, which would punch through enemy lines at unexpected points. Crucially, these armoured spearheads were not meant to fight every pocket of resistance, but to bypass them, disrupting command and control, and sowing chaos behind the front lines. Following closely behind the tanks, motorised infantry would secure the ground, and consolidate gains and mop up bypassed enemy forces. Air power played an equally vital role. Dive bombers, such as the Stuka, provided close air support, targeting enemy strongpoints, artillery positions, and communication hubs. This aerial bombardment further disoriented the enemy, creating corridors for the advancing ground forces and hindering any attempts at counterattack or reinforcement. The radio was a critical tool, allowing for unprecedented levels of communication and coordination between tanks, infantry, and air support, enabling commanders to adapt quickly to changing battlefield conditions. This synergistic combination of tanks, motorized infantry, and tactical air support, operating with speed and surprise, aimed to induce a state of shock and paralysis in the enemy, leading to rapid collapse. The success of this doctrine in the initial campaigns of the Second World War would fundamentally alter the understanding of modern warfare, and it was within this new paradigm that officers like Erwin Rommel would soon find their most defining roles. The spring of 1940 brought with it a profound shift in Erwin Rommel's career. After his period observing from Hitler's headquarters, a new and far more direct challenge emerged. He was appointed commander of the 7th Panzer Division, a significant promotion that placed him at the forefront of Germany's offensive strategy. This was his first major command of an armoured division, a unit designed to implement the very principles of blitzkrieg that had been so recently formalised. For Rommel, whose experience had largely been in infantry tactics and training, either this was a moment of quiet anticipation, a true test of his adaptability and leadership in a completely new environment. The 7th Panzer Division, though relatively new, was a potent force, equipped with tanks, motorized infantry, and the supporting elements necessary for rapid, independent operations. Its readiness for the impending invasion of France would largely rest on Rommel's ability to lead and inspire. The atmosphere preceding the campaign was one of hushed expectation. Across the German lines, preparations were meticulously underway. Maps were studied, orders were disseminated, and the complex logistics of moving a modern army into battle were being managed with precision. Rommel, with his characteristic attention to detail, would have been deeply immersed in these preparations, or ensuring his division was poised to execute its role in the larger offensive. The invasion of France, scheduled for May 1940, represented not only a critical strategic objective for Germany, but also a proving ground for the blitzkrieg doctrine itself. For Rommel, it was an opportunity to apply his long-held beliefs in mobile warfare and aggressive leadership to a far grander scale than ever before. The quiet moments before the storm would have been filled with the weight of this responsibility, as he prepared to lead his men into what would become one of the most decisive campaigns in military history. This was the moment for which his entire military career had, in a sense, been a preparation. The invasion of France commenced, and with it, the 7th Panzer Division under Rommel's command began a series of actions that would quickly distinguish it. From the outset, the division demonstrated an extraordinary pace, moving with an agility that often confounded both enemy forces and even elements of its own high command. This relentless advance, often far ahead of neighbouring units, earned it the evocative nickname Ghost Division. The moniker arose from the division's uncanny ability to appear suddenly in unexpected locations, disrupting Allied defences before they could fully coalesce. its rapid penetrations deep into French territory created widespread confusion and panic, contributing significantly to the overall collapse of resistance. This success was not merely a matter of mechanical speed, it was fundamentally driven by Rommel's aggressive and highly personal leadership style. Rommel was frequently at the very spearhead of his advancing columns, often leading from a command tank or even a reconnaissance vehicle. His presence at the front allowed him to make immediate decisions based on real-time observations, bypassing traditional, slower command structures. This direct involvement meant that his orders were often given in the thick of battle, adapting to the fluid situation with a speed that few other commanders could match. Such forward leadership, while inspiring to his troops, sometimes led to periods where his own headquarters lost track of his exact position. These moments of radio silence, combined with the division's rapid movements, only further cemented its reputation as a phantom force, on striking without warning and vanishing before the enemy could effectively react. The Ghost Division became a testament to the power of concentrated, aggressive armoured thrusts, and to the unique hands-on command philosophy of Erwin Rommel. During the French campaign, Rommel's command of the 7th Panzer Division was characterised by a series of remarkably audacious decisions that frequently pushed the boundaries of conventional military thought. He possessed an intuitive grasp of the battlefield, often choosing to exploit fleeting opportunities rather than adhere strictly to prearranged plans or await explicit orders from higher command. This willingness to take calculated risks was a defining feature of his leadership. One notable instance occurred early in the campaign, when his division, having rapidly crossed the Meuse River, has found itself in a position to advance deeply into enemy territory. Instead of pausing to consolidate or wait for infantry support, Rommel pressed forward with his tanks, creating a wide breach in the French lines. This aggressive manoeuvre, though exposing his flanks, capitalised on the disarray of the defending forces and prevented them from regrouping effectively. Such rapid advances, however, inevitably created significant logistical challenges. The supply lines for fuel, ammunition and provisions struggled to keep pace with the swift movement of the armoured columns. Rommel, ever pragmatic, addressed these issues with characteristic improvisation. He frequently ordered his units to seize enemy supply depots, requisitioning whatever resources they could find, from fuel and food to spare parts. This opportunistic approach, though unorthodox, allowed his division to maintain its momentum even when its official supply chain was stretched to its breaking point. He also utilised captured French vehicles and facilities to supplement his own, demonstrating a resourcefulness that was crucial to sustaining the relentless tempo of the advance. These bold decisions and improvisational solutions were instrumental in the 7th Panzer Division's remarkable success, transforming potential logistical bottlenecks into temporary inconveniences and allowing the Ghost Division to continue its uninterrupted drive across France. The conclusion of the French campaign in 1940 solidified Erwin Rommel's standing as a truly innovative and exceptionally effective military commander. His leadership of the 7th Panzer Division had been a masterclass in aggressive mobile warfare, as demonstrating the full potential of blitzkrieg tactics when applied with daring and precision. The quiet satisfaction of a job well done settled over him, a testament to the successful application of principles he had long advocated and refined. The rapid and decisive victories achieved by the Ghost Division resonated throughout the German military high command and beyond. Rommel's unconventional methods, his personal presence at the forefront of the fighting, and his relentless pursuit of the enemy had produced results that far exceeded expectations. He had taken a newly formed armoured division, composed of soldiers with limited experience in tank warfare, and transformed it into one of the most feared and effective units of the campaign. This period marked a significant turning point in his career, yet as the attention he received began to grow substantially. His superiors recognized his unique capabilities, and his name started to circulate in military circles as a rising star. A commander who understood how to break through entrenched doctrines and achieve decisive outcomes. The success in France was not merely a tactical victory. It was a validation of Rommel's personal philosophy of war, rooted in speed, surprise, and unwavering aggression. His reputation, carefully built through years of study, instruction, and now combat application, was firmly established. He was no longer merely a respected infantry instructor, but a proven battlefield leader whose methods had been tested under fire and found remarkably effective. This growing recognition would soon lead to new and even more demanding assignments, if further shaping the trajectory of his distinguished yet ultimately complex military career. As the year 1941 began, the strategic landscape of the Second World War was shifting, and a new theatre of operations was drawing the attention of the German High Command. Far from the battlefields of Western Europe, the vast, arid expanses of North Africa and the sun-drenched waters of the Mediterranean were becoming a critical zone of conflict. Here, Italy, Germany's Axis partner, was facing significant difficulties in its campaigns against British forces. Mussolini's ambitions in North Africa had encountered robust resistance. Italian attempts to push into Egypt from Libya had been met with a devastating British counter-offensive Operation Compass, which had inflicted heavy losses on the Italian 10th Army. By early 1941, British forces had advanced deep into Italian Libya, capturing tens of thousands of prisoners and vast quantities of equipment. The situation for Italy was precarious, threatening a complete collapse of their North African holdings. This deteriorating situation presented a strategic dilemma for Germany. While the primary focus of German military planning remained on the looming Eastern Front, the collapse of Italy's position in North Africa would have significant geopolitical repercussions. It would expose the southern flank of Axis Europe, potentially allowing the British to gain a strong foothold from which to project power into the Balkans or even southern Europe. Reluctantly, and with an eye towards stabilising the Axis alliance and protecting its strategic interests, Germany made the decision to intervene, where a relatively small expeditionary force, initially conceived as a blocking detachment, was to be dispatched to Libya. Its primary purpose was to bolster the faltering Italian defences and prevent a complete British takeover of the region. This intervention, though initially modest in scale, would inadvertently set the stage for one of the most famous and challenging campaigns of the entire war. The desolate, shifting sands of the North African desert were about to become the backdrop for Erwin Rommel's most celebrated and ultimately most demanding military endeavours. On February 12, 1941, General Major Erwin Rommel arrived in Tripoli, the capital of Italian Libya, to assume command of a newly formed German contingent. This force, initially designated as the German Blocking Detachment, and later famously known as the Deutsches Afrika Korps, or simply the Afrika Korps, represented Germany's commitment to salvaging the Axis position in North Africa. Rommel's arrival marked a profound transition, not only in his personal command but also in the nature of the warfare he would now conduct. The environment of North Africa presented a stark and immediate contrast to the familiar landscapes of Western Europe, where he had achieved his earlier successes. Instead of the verdant fields, rolling hills, and established road networks of France, Rommel was confronted by an immense, largely featureless desert. The challenges of this new theatre were immediate and pervasive. The climate was extreme, characterised by scorching daytime temperatures and often plunging to frigid lows at night. Dust storms, known locally as Ghibli, could reduce visibility to zero in moments, choking men and machinery alike. Water, a fundamental necessity, was scarce and often brackish. Logistics, which had been a constant challenge even in Europe, became an exponentially more complex undertaking in the desert. Supplies had to be transported across vast distances, often over trackless terrain, under constant threat from British air and naval power in the Mediterranean. Maintaining vehicles in the harsh conditions of sand, heat, and limited repair facilities was a continuous struggle. Furthermore, the very nature of desert warfare was distinct. There were few fixed positions or natural obstacles to anchor a defence. Battles would often be highly fluid, characterised by long-range engagements, rapid manoeuvres, and the constant search for flanks to exploit. This vast, open environment, while presenting immense difficulties, also offered opportunities for the kind of audacious, mobile warfare that Rommel had championed throughout his career. He would soon discover that the desert, in its unforgiving vastness, would become both his greatest adversary and the crucible of his legend. Upon his arrival in the Libyan desert, Rommel did not hesitate to immerse himself in the realities of his new command. His approach was characteristically hands-on, a method he had consistently employed throughout his career, from his early days as a junior officer to his command of a panzer division. He understood that effective leadership in an unfamiliar environment demanded direct observation and a deep personal understanding of the conditions. Rommel immediately began an intensive program of reconnaissance. He did not rely solely on reports from his subordinates or the Italian command, but rather took to the air and the ground himself. Flying in observation planes, he surveyed the vast expanses of the desert from above, gaining a perspective on the terrain that maps alone could not provide. From these aerial vantage points, he could discern the subtle undulations of the land, the patterns of wadis and escarpments, and the potential routes for both advance and defence. On the ground, he tirelessly drove across the desert in his command vehicle, often venturing far ahead of his main forces. This allowed him to feel the sand beneath the tyres, to assess the trafficability of different surfaces, and to identify the critical geographical features that would dictate tactical movements. He meticulously studied the terrain, noting the locations of wells, the viability of tracks, and the suitability of areas for concealed troop movements or defensive positions. His rapid assessment of the situation extended beyond geography to include the capabilities and morale of the Italian forces he was ostensibly there to support. He quickly recognized the logistical deficiencies and the general state of disarray that had plagued their recent operations. This first-hand appraisal informed his subsequent decisions, leading him to conclude that a purely defensive posture, as initially envisioned by the German High Command, might not be sufficient. This immediate immersive effort to understand the desert was crucial. It enabled Rommel to quickly formulate strategies that were uniquely suited to the North African theatre, rather than attempting to apply European doctrines wholesale. His willingness to personally confront the harsh realities of the environment, to learn from it directly, set the stage for the audacious campaigns that would soon unfold. Despite directives from the German High Command to remain on the defensive, Rommel, having quickly assessed the situation and the British deployment, concluded that an opportunity for offensive action existed. He perceived a certain complacency among the British forces, who, having recently achieved significant victories against the Italians, had dispersed their units and underestimated the capabilities of the newly arrived German contingent. This perception, coupled with his inherent aggressive temperament, led him to initiate an unexpected offensive in late March 1941. His initial moves were cautious probes, designed to test the British defences and gather further intelligence. However, as these probes met with less resistance than anticipated, Rommel swiftly escalated his operations. He employed his limited resources with characteristic audacity, pushing forward with a combination of German and reconstituted Italian units. The element of surprise was a powerful weapon in his hands. The British, expecting a period of consolidation from the Africa Corps, were caught off guard by the speed and determination of the Axis advance. Rommel's tactics during this first desert offensive mirrored the principles he had applied in France. He emphasized rapid movement, bypassing strong points, and striking at the enemy's flanks and rear. His panzers, though not numerous, were used with maximum effect, creating confusion and disrupting British command and control. He personally led from the front, often far ahead of his headquarters, making on-the-spot decisions that exploited fleeting opportunities. This direct involvement instilled a sense of urgency and confidence in his troops. The offensive quickly gained momentum, pushing the British forces back across Cyrenaica. Key positions like Elageila and Mersa Brega fell in rapid succession. The British 2nd Armoured Division, which had borne the brunt of the Axis assault, found itself in retreat, struggling to re-establish a cohesive front. Within weeks, Rommel had driven the British nearly 500 miles eastward, recapturing most of the territory that had been lost by the Italians and reaching the Egyptian frontier. This remarkable initial success, achieved with relatively modest forces, immediately established Rommel's reputation as a formidable desert commander. The rapid Axis advance in early 1941 culminated at the strategic port city of Tobruk. Rather than bypass it, Rommel chose to invest the fortress, recognizing its immense value as a supply hub and a potential base for British counter-offensives. What began as an anticipated swift capture, however, transformed into a prolonged and arduous siege, lasting for many months and becoming a defining feature of the early Desert War. Tobruk was defended by a determined garrison, initially composed primarily of Australian troops, later reinforced by British, Indian, and other Commonwealth units. They had established a formidable defensive perimeter, characterized by multiple layers of minefields, anti-tank ditches, and dug-in positions. Rommel's initial attempts to storm the fortress, driven by his usual aggressive tempo, met with stiff resistance and resulted in significant casualties. The defenders held their ground with tenacity, inflicting heavy losses on the attacking Axis forces. The siege quickly devolved into a brutal war of attrition. Rommel found himself bogged down, his mobile warfare doctrine less effective against a well-prepared static defence. The fighting was characterised by fierce local engagements, often at close quarters, across the dusty, rock-strewn terrain surrounding the port. Artillery duels and localised infantry attacks became common occurrences. The ebb and flow of these minor battles saw both sides gain and lose ground, with neither able to achieve a decisive breakthrough for an extended period. Tobruk became more than just a military objective. It evolved into a powerful symbol. For the Allies, its continued resistance, deep behind Axis lines, was a beacon of defiance and testament to their resolve. For Rommel, its stubborn refusal to fall became an increasing frustration, consuming valuable resources and tying down significant portions of his command. The Desert Fox, known for his lightning advances, was now confronted with a static, grinding battle that tested the endurance of his forces and the limits of his strategic flexibility. The prolonged siege of Tobruk underscored the complex and unforgiving nature of warfare in the North African theatre. The vast distances and harsh environment of the North African desert presented an immense and unyielding logistical challenge for all combatants, but particularly for the Axis forces under Rommel's command. Every drop of fuel, every bullet, every ration of water had to be transported across the Mediterranean Sea, then moved hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles across unforgiving terrain. This extended and vulnerable supply chain was a constant source of anxiety and a fundamental constraint on Rommel's ambitious plans. The journey across the Mediterranean was fraught with peril. Allied air and naval superiority meant that Axis convoys were frequently intercepted and attacked. leading to significant losses of vital supplies and shipping. Even when supplies successfully reached port, the subsequent overland journey was slow and arduous. The few existing roads were often poor, and the desert tracks were challenging for vehicles, leading to breakdowns and delays. Fuel, in particular, was a perennial concern. Rommel's mobile tactics, which relied on rapid, long-distance movements of tanks and motorized infantry, consumed fuel at an alarming rate. The chronic shortages often forced him to halt offensives, compromise strategic objectives, or even withdraw from advantageous positions, simply because his vehicles had run dry. Water was another critical commodity, essential for both men and machines in the extreme desert heat. Its scarcity profoundly impacted troop welfare and operational planning. Ammunition, spare parts, and even basic foodstuffs were also constantly in short supply. As Rommel's dispatches and personal writings frequently reveal his deep frustration with these persistent logistical limitations. He understood that his tactical genius and the bravery of his soldiers could only achieve so much without the necessary material support. The logistical lifeline, tenuous and frequently severed, was the invisible hand that often dictated the pace and scale of the Desert War, a constant source of friction that Rommel battled as fiercely as he did the Allied armies. In May of 1942, Rommel orchestrated one of his most celebrated and tactically brilliant victories, the Battle of Gazala. This engagement saw the Axis forces confront the formidable Gazala line, a series of fortified defensive boxes stretching south from the Mediterranean coast, designed by the British to block any further Axis advance towards Egypt. Rommel recognised that a direct frontal assault against such deeply entrenched positions would be costly and likely ineffective. Instead, he conceived an audacious flanking manoeuvre, leveraging the open desert to the south. His plan involved a wide, sweeping movement around the southernmost end of the Gazala line, aiming to strike the British forces from the rear. On the night of May 26th, Rommel's Panzer Army Afrika, comprising German and Italian armoured divisions, began its long march under the cover of darkness. The manoeuvre was initially successful, catching elements of the British Eighth Army by surprise as they appeared far behind their main defensive positions. However, the British quickly adapted, forming a strong defensive perimeter around a cluster of fortified positions known as Bir Hakeim, held by the Free French. This steadfast resistance, combined with fierce armoured counterattacks, temporarily stalled Rommel's advance and inflicted significant losses on his panzers. Facing a precarious situation with his supply lines stretched, and his forces exposed to attacks from the British boxes to his west, Rommel made another bold decision. He consolidated his forces into a defensive position that became known as the Cauldron. This was a horseshoe-shaped perimeter, open to the east, but fortified against attacks from the west and south. Inside this cauldron, Rommel absorbed repeated British counterattacks, particularly from their armoured brigades, while simultaneously launching his own attacks against the British boxes to his west. Through a combination of skillful defensive tactics, coordinated artillery, and effective anti-tank gun employment, Rommel's forces systematically reduced the British strongpoints. The fighting within the cauldron was intense and brutal, a testament to the ferocity of desert warfare. By early June, Rommel had successfully cleared his western flank and then turned his attention eastward, breaking out of the cauldron and resuming his offensive. This tactical brilliance, turning a dangerous encirclement into a springboard for further advance, showcased Rommel's adaptability and daring, ultimately leading to the fall of Tobruk shortly thereafter. Following the decisive success at Gazala and the subsequent fall of Tobruk in June 1942, a profound sense of momentum propelled Rommel's Panzer Army Afrika deep into Egypt. The path seemed open, and the strategic prize, the Suez Canal, felt tantalizingly close. Then this period marked the furthest eastward advance of Axis forces in North Africa, a moment of significant strategic importance and quiet tension for both sides. The British Eighth Army, reeling from the defeats, was forced into a rapid and extended retreat. Rommel, sensing the opportunity to deliver a decisive blow, pressed his advantage relentlessly. His forces, though depleted and suffering from the perennial logistical strain, advanced with remarkable speed across hundreds of miles of desert. The capture of Tobruk had provided a temporary, albeit insufficient boost in supplies and equipment, fueling the belief that a final breakthrough was within reach. The advance was swift, passing through towns and landscapes previously untouched by the conflict. The desert itself seemed to stretch endlessly before them, a vast and flat expanse offering little natural cover, yet demanding immense endurance from men and machines. Each mile gained brought Rommel closer to the Nile Delta, to the vital port of Alexandria, and potentially to the strategic control of the Suez Canal, a lifeline for the British Empire. As the Axis forces approached the final defensive lines, the atmosphere became charged with a quiet anticipation. The British, under new command, had established a formidable defensive position, stretching from the Mediterranean coast south to the impassable Qattara Depression. This narrow choke point, approximately 40 miles wide, offered the only viable route to Alexandria and Cairo. There was no longer any flank to turn. This was El Alamein, a small railway station that would soon lend its name to a pivotal battle. The advance had carried Rommel to the very doorstep of Egypt's heartland. The strategic stakes were immense, and the quiet tension that settled over the desert reflected the understanding that the next engagement would determine the fate of the North African campaign. The long, arduous push had culminated in this narrow strip of land, where the desert war would reach its most critical juncture. The First Battle of El Alamein commenced in July 1942, marking a stark departure from the mobile warfare that had characterized much of Rommel's desert campaigns. The Axis forces, having pushed deep into Egypt, now faced a well-established British defensive line that stretched across the narrow 40-mile corridor between the Mediterranean Sea and the Qattara Depression. This terrain offered no opportunity for the sweeping flanking manoeuvres that were Rommel's signature. Instead, the battle devolved into a static, grinding engagement, a brutal test of attrition. Rommel, despite his preference for rapid, decisive movements, was compelled to confront the British head-on. His initial attacks, launched with dwindling reserves of fuel and ammunition, met fierce resistance. The British Eighth Army, under the command of General Claude Auchinleck, had regrouped and fortified its positions, utilising extensive minefields and well-placed artillery. The fighting was intense and protracted, unfolding across a landscape of sand, rocks and dug-in positions. Days blurred into weeks of continuous combat, marked by desperate charges, counter-attacks, and relentless artillery barrages. Rommel's forces, though exhausted from their long advance and the constant strain of logistical shortages, found themselves increasingly bogged down. The desert heat was oppressive, and access to fresh water became a critical concern, further draining the strength of the Axis soldiers. This was a battle of endurance where strategic brilliance was overshadowed by the sheer weight of manpower and material. Rommel's Panzer Army Africa, already at the end of a long and vulnerable supply line, was simply unable to sustain the offensive against a resurgent and numerically superior foe. Each attempted push faltered, met by determined defence and effective counterfire. By the end of July, it became clear that a decisive breakthrough was not possible. Both sides were severely depleted, but Rommel's forces had reached their operational limit. The battle concluded in a stalemate, with neither side able to dislodge the other. For Rommel, this represented not only a halt to his advance, but also a profound strategic setback. The dream of reaching the Nile and the Suez Canal had receded. replaced by the grim reality of a prolonged, static defensive struggle. The exhaustion of his forces, both physical and material, was palpable, signalling a turning point in the Desert War. The unrelenting pressures of command in the North African theatre began to take a significant toll on Erwin Rommel's health. The harsh desert environment, characterized by extreme temperatures, persistent dust, and the constant threat of disease, exacerbated the physical strain. Coupled with this was the immense psychological burden of leading an army constantly on the edge of collapse, perpetually battling logistical deficiencies and facing an increasingly formidable adversary. Rommel, known for his hands-on approach and frequent presence at the front, rarely allowed himself respite. The long hours, irregular sleep, and the immense responsibility of his position contributed to a noticeable decline in his well-being. By the summer of 1942, after the grueling First Battle of El Alamein, his condition had become critical. He suffered from chronic digestive issues, debilitating fatigue, and what some described as a state of nervous exhaustion. His complexion was sallow, and his once sharp demeanour showed signs of profound weariness. Recognizing the necessity for his commander to recuperate, and perhaps also to consult with the High Command, Hitler granted Rommel leave to return to Germany in September 1942. This was a brief but essential period away from the front lines. During his time in Germany, Rommel underwent medical treatment and attempted to restore his physical and mental reserves. He also used the opportunity to convey, in person, the dire situation in North Africa, emphasizing the critical need for reinforcements and supplies that had been consistently denied. Yet even during this period of recuperation, the quiet burden of command remained. Rommel was acutely aware of the precarious position of his army in the desert. The brief respite offered little true peace, as the strategic realities of the war continued to weigh heavily on his mind. His return to Germany was a fleeting pause in an escalating conflict, a moment to mend, however imperfectly, before facing the inevitable next chapter of the Desert War. The respite was necessary, yet insufficient to fully restore the man who had pushed himself to the very limits of human endurance. Upon his return from Germany, Erwin Rommel was immediately confronted with the ominous preparations for what would become the decisive engagement in North Africa, the Second Battle of El Alamein. The British Eighth Army, now under the resolute command of General Bernard Montgomery, had spent months meticulously building up its strength, resources, and morale. By October 1942, the Allied forces at El Alamein represented a formidable, well-supplied, and numerically superior fighting machine. The battle commenced on the evening of October 23, 1942, with a sustained and powerful artillery barrage, signalling the beginning of Operation Lightfoot. Montgomery's strategy was to launch a concentrated infantry assault to breach the extensive Axis minefields and defensive positions, followed by a decisive armoured thrust. Rommel, though initially absent due to illness and still recovering, returned to the front to lead his beleaguered forces. He found an army already stretched thin, exhausted, and desperately short of fuel, ammunition, and replacements. Rommel's defensive efforts were characterized by his customary tactical acumen, attempting to counter the overwhelming Allied onslaught with carefully placed strongpoints and localized counterattacks. He deployed his limited armoured reserves strategically, aiming to blunt the British thrusts and inflict maximum casualties. However, the sheer weight of Allied numbers, their complete air superiority, and their uninterrupted flow of supplies proved insurmountable. Wave after wave of British and Commonwealth troops pressed forward, slowly but inexorably grinding down the Axis defences. The battle became a prolonged attritional struggle, lasting for nearly 2 weeks. Rommel fought with characteristic determination, yet the quiet realization began to settle upon him that the tide of the Desert War had irrevocably turned. Each day brought further losses, diminishing his army's capacity to resist. The tactical brilliance that had once defined his desert campaigns could not overcome the fundamental imbalance of resources. The Second Battle of El Alamein was not just a defeat in battle. It was the quiet, undeniable confirmation of the beginning of the end for the Axis presence in North Africa. With a conclusive defeat at the Second Battle of El Alamein, Rommel faced the daunting task of preserving what remained of his Afrika Korps and Italian forces. What followed was one of the most remarkable and arduous retreats in military history, stretching thousands of kilometres across the vast North African desert. It was a testament to Rommel's defensive acumen, even in the face of overwhelming odds and strategic loss. The retreat began in early November 1942. Rommel, despite orders from Hitler to stand fast, recognised the futility of such a command and made the independent decision to withdraw. This act of defiance underscored his pragmatic approach to command, prioritising the survival of his troops over rigid adherence to impossible directives. He skillfully disengaged his battered units from Montgomery's pursuing Eighth Army, employing delaying tactics and exploiting the terrain to his advantage. His forces were critically short of fuel, water and food, constantly harassed by Allied air power and battling a relentless enemy. Yet, Rommel orchestrated a series of rearguard actions using minefields, anti-tank guns, and the rapid movement of his remaining mobile units to frustrate the British advance. Each defensive stand was temporary, designed only to buy precious time for the main body of his army to withdraw further west. This sustained withdrawal was a grueling test of endurance for both commander and soldier. The quiet determination amidst the profound sense of loss permeated the ranks. Rommel's ability to maintain cohesion and fighting spirit in a defeated and retreating army under such immense pressure, he highlighted his extraordinary leadership qualities. He minimised casualties where possible and successfully extracted a significant portion of his forces, demonstrating a mastery of operational retreat that few commanders have ever achieved. The long journey westward, from Egypt through Libya and into Tunisia, was a strategic defeat, yet it simultaneously showcased Rommel's enduring tactical brilliance. As Rommel's forces were engaged in their desperate westward retreat across the Libyan desert, a new and profoundly significant development unfolded on the other side of the North African continent. On November 8, 1942, just days after the British breakthrough at El Alamein, a massive Allied amphibious operation codenamed Operation Torch commenced. American and British forces landed simultaneously at various points along the coast of French North Africa, specifically in Morocco and Algeria. These landings were largely unexpected by the Axis powers, who had been preoccupied with the Desert War in the east. The primary objective of Operation Torch was to secure these strategically vital territories, which were then under the control of Vichy France, and to establish a second major front against the Axis in North Africa. The scale of the landings was considerable, involving hundreds of ships and tens of thousands of troops. While initial resistance from Vichy French forces was encountered, it was generally short-lived, and within days the Allies had secured their beachheads and began pushing inland. For Rommel, already facing the immense pressure of Montgomery's pursuing Eighth Army from the east, the success of Operation Torch presented a catastrophic new reality. His retreating forces were now effectively caught in a developing pincer movement. To his east, the British were pressing relentlessly. To his west, fresh and well-supplied Allied armies were establishing themselves, poised to advance eastward. The strategic landscape of North Africa had been fundamentally altered, transforming the Desert War into a broader, more complex theatre of operations, with the Axis forces now trapped between two powerful Allied fronts. This development significantly complicated any hope of a stable defensive line for Rommel's beleaguered army. The stage was now set for the final act of the North African campaign, known as the Tunisian campaign. Rommel, having completed his arduous retreat from El Alamein, found himself in a desperate struggle to stabilize a shrinking front in Tunisia. Here, his forces, a combination of the Afrika Korps and Italian units, were reinforced by newly arrived German and Italian troops airlifted into the bridgehead. His objective was clear, though increasingly unattainable: to hold a defensive perimeter around Tunis and Bizerte against the converging Allied armies. From the east, Montgomery's Eighth Army continued its methodical advance, pushing through the Mareth Line, a pre-existing French defensive fortification. From the west, the American and British forces from Operation Torch, under the overall command of Dwight D. Eisenhower, pressed eastward, gradually gaining experience and strength. Rommel, ever the tactician, then attempted to exploit the initial inexperience of the American forces with bold, localized counterattacks. The Battle of Kasserine Pass in February 1943 saw German and Italian forces inflict a significant, though temporary, setback on the American Second Corps. This brief success, however, could not alter the fundamental strategic imbalance. Rommel understood that the Axis position in Tunisia was untenable. The Allied air superiority was overwhelming, strangling Axis supply lines across the Mediterranean. Reinforcements and vital material struggled to reach the trapped forces. Despite his persistent efforts to reorganize and inspire his weary troops, Rommel could sense the quiet desperation settling over the battlefield. He was fighting a losing battle, a prolonged delaying action against inevitable defeat. The campaign became a grim testament to his defensive skill, a final, futile effort to prolong a conflict that had already been decided by the overwhelming weight of Allied resources and manpower. Within the broader struggle of the Tunisian campaign, one particular engagement briefly illuminated Rommel's enduring tactical prowess: the Battle of Kasserine Pass. In February 1943, as Axis forces in Tunisia faced the formidable pressure of converging Allied armies, Rommel sought an opportunity to strike back. His target was the American Second Corps, which had advanced into the passes of the Dorsal Mountains. The American forces, though numerous, were relatively new to large-scale combat in North Africa. Their command structures were still adapting to the realities of desert warfare, and their troops lacked the hardened experience of the British Eighth Army or Rommel's veterans. Rommel, recognizing this vulnerability, planned a swift, concentrated attack aimed at disrupting the Allied offensive and potentially seizing vital supply dumps. On February 14th, Axis forces, spearheaded by elements of the 10th and 21st Panzer Divisions, launched their assault. Rommel directed the offensive with his customary audacity and speed. German tanks and infantry rapidly overwhelmed American forward positions, exploiting gaps and weaknesses in their defences. The passes, including Faid Pass and Kasserine Pass itself, became scenes of intense fighting, with the inexperienced American units struggling to withstand the coordinated Axis attacks. The battle resulted in a significant, albeit temporary, defeat for the American forces. They suffered substantial casualties, lost considerable equipment, and were forced to retreat. For a brief period, Rommel's old tactical brilliance seemed to shine through the gathering gloom. He had skillfully manoeuvred his limited forces to deliver a sharp, punishing blow. However, this glimmer of success was ultimately unsustainable. While Kasserine Pass provided valuable lessons for the Americans, leading to crucial adjustments in their leadership and tactics, it did not fundamentally alter the strategic situation for the Axis. Rommel's forces lacked the strength and logistical support to exploit their victory beyond a localized engagement. The larger Allied pincer movement continued its inexorable advance, rendering even such a decisive tactical win merely a delay in the inevitable. The strain of the desert campaigns, via the relentless fighting and the mounting frustration of commanding an increasingly outmatched force, had taken a severe toll on Erwin Rommel. By early 1943, his health was significantly deteriorated. He suffered from chronic stomach and liver problems, exacerbated by the harsh conditions and the immense pressure of his command. The physical and mental exhaustion was profound. As the Axis position in Tunisia became ever more precarious, with the Allied vice tightening from both east and west, the German High Command made the decision to recall Rommel. This was presented as a necessary measure for his health, but it also served to remove him from the inevitable collapse that was fast approaching. Rommel himself had grown increasingly pessimistic about the prospects of holding Tunisia, recognizing the overwhelming Allied superiority in numbers, materiel, and air power. He had repeatedly argued for a full withdrawal, only to be overruled by Hitler. Thus, in March 1943, Rommel quietly departed from Africa. There was no grand ceremony, no triumphant farewell. He flew out of the shrinking Axis enclave, leaving behind the men of the Africa Corps, the soldiers he had led through so many impossible victories and harrowing retreats. It was a sombre and understated end to his legend in the desert. The landscape that had defined his fame, where he had forged his reputation as the Desert Fox, was now receding beneath him, soon to be entirely lost. His departure marked the quiet cessation of his direct involvement in the North African theatre. The battles he had fought, the ground he had traversed, and the tactical brilliance he had demonstrated would soon be overshadowed by the final, comprehensive Allied victory. The Africa Corps, his beloved fighting force, would be encircled and forced to surrender just 2 months later, a fate Rommel was spared from witnessing firsthand. His time in Africa, a period of both extraordinary success and ultimate defeat, had concluded. Upon his return to Germany in March 1943, Erwin Rommel was still publicly celebrated as a national hero. Despite the strategic defeat in North Africa, his image as the Desert Fox remained potent in German propaganda. He was hailed for his tactical brilliance, his daring leadership, and his ability to achieve so much with so little. Official narratives carefully omitted the true extent of the strategic collapse and the overwhelming odds he had faced, instead focusing on his personal triumphs and the valour of his troops. However, beneath the veneer of public adoration, the reality of the war had fundamentally shifted. Rommel, with his direct experience on the front lines, understood this acutely. The Eastern Front was a grinding, attritional meat grinder, and the tide had turned decisively against Germany after Stalingrad. In the West, the Allies were preparing for an inevitable invasion of Europe, a threat Rommel had long anticipated. The initiative was now firmly with the Allied powers. For Rommel, this period was marked by a quiet internal conflict. He was a soldier committed to his duty, yet he was increasingly confronted with the grim prospect of inevitable defeat. The strategic situation was no longer one of swift offensives and daring manoeuvres, thus but of desperate defence against overwhelming force. He had seen firsthand the destructive power of Allied air superiority and the vastness of their resources. These observations fueled a growing sense of realism within him, a realism that often clashed with the Führer's unwavering, yet increasingly detached optimism. He understood that Germany was now fighting a defensive war on multiple fronts, a war that could not be won with tactical genius alone. The resources were dwindling, the manpower stretched thin, and the strategic initiative was lost. This shift in reality, from the dynamic offensive campaigns of his early career to the grim defensive struggle, presented a profound challenge to his military philosophy and his deeply ingrained sense of duty. In late 1943, following a period of recuperation and reflection, Erwin Rommel was appointed to inspect and improve the defences of the Atlantic Wall. This vast network of fortifications stretched along the coast of Western Europe, a formidable barrier intended to repel the anticipated Allied invasion. Rommel's task was immense, his mission critical. He was to breathe new life into a static defence, to transform what was largely a series of unconnected strongpoints into a cohesive and formidable shield. He approached this assignment with his characteristic meticulousness and unrelenting energy. Rommel embarked on extensive tours of inspection, travelling thousands of kilometres along the French, Belgian and Dutch coasts. He personally examined existing bunkers, observed troop readiness, and assessed the natural terrain. His keen eye quickly identified significant deficiencies. Many sectors were poorly organised, defences lacked depth, and troops were often inadequately trained or equipped. Rommel's vision for the Atlantic Wall went far beyond static concrete emplacements. He insisted on active layered defences, advocating for vast minefields, extensive beach obstacles, and underwater impediments designed to destroy landing craft and disorganise amphibious assaults before they could even reach the shore. He ordered the construction of millions of anti-personnel and anti-tank mines, the placement of sharpened stakes, and the flooding of low-lying coastal areas. His objective was clear: to defeat the invasion on the beaches, for he understood that once the Allies gained a secure foothold, their superior air power and material strength would make dislodging them exceedingly difficult. The quiet weight of this responsibility pressed upon him. He recognised the monumental nature of the task and the limited time remaining. Despite his tireless efforts, he often found himself frustrated by bureaucratic inertia, conflicting command structures, and a chronic shortage of resources. He worked with a quiet urgency, knowing that the fate of Western Europe, and perhaps the war itself, rested heavily on these preparations. His efforts, though extensive, were ultimately a race against an inevitable and overwhelming tide. As spring of 1944 quietly unfolded, a palpable tension settled over Western Europe. The air was thick with anticipation. The Allied invasion, long expected, now felt imminent. For Erwin Rommel, this period was marked by a deepening sense of urgency and a growing frustration with the strategic disagreements that plagued the German High Command. His primary concern revolved around the deployment of armoured reserves. Rommel firmly believed that any counterattack against an Allied landing had to be swift and decisive, launched directly on the beaches. His experience in North Africa had taught him the devastating power of Allied air superiority. He foresaw that any German armoured units held too far inland would be relentlessly pounded from the air before they could ever reach the invasion front. Therefore, he argued vehemently for the forward positioning of panzer divisions, close enough to the coast to engage the enemy within hours of their arrival. However, other influential commanders, notably Gerd von Rundstedt, the Commander-in-Chief West, held a different view. They believed the main armoured reserves should be held centrally, allowing them to be committed to the sector where the primary Allied thrust developed. This disagreement stemmed from differing interpretations of Allied intentions and capabilities. Von Rundstedt and others feared a feint, a secondary landing, and wished to retain flexibility. Rommel's quiet foresight, however, was rooted in a practical understanding of modern warfare and the specific challenges of defending against an amphibious assault under Allied air dominance. He understood that once the Allies established a beachhead, their logistical might would quickly make it impregnable. The window for a successful counterattack was narrow, measured in hours, not days. This fundamental divergence in strategy created a deep fissure within the German command, leaving Rommel increasingly isolated in his conviction, even as the invasion loomed ever closer. The early hours of June 6, 1944, brought forth the culmination of years of Allied planning. Under the cover of darkness and a carefully constructed deception, vast numbers of Allied troops began to land on the beaches of Normandy. This was Operation Overlord, the largest amphibious invasion in history, a moment that would irrevocably alter the course of the war. Coincidentally, on this momentous day, Erwin Rommel was not at his command post in France. It was his wife Lucy's birthday, and he had quietly travelled to Herlingen to spend this personal occasion with his family. The weather forecasts had predicted unfavourable conditions for an invasion, providing a brief window of perceived safety that allowed for this quiet domestic interlude. The news reached him during the morning, shattering the tranquillity of his family visit. The reports were initially fragmented and confusing, but the sheer scale of the landing soon became unmistakably clear. Rommel immediately understood the profound implications. His quiet moment of personal life was abruptly interrupted by the momentous turning point he had long anticipated. He swiftly departed for his headquarters in La Roche-Guyon. His journey back was a testament to the chaos and disruption already engulfing the region. Upon arrival, he immediately plunged into the desperate task of organising a counterattack. However, the very issues he had predicted were already manifesting. Allied air power dominated the skies, making troop movements hazardous and slow. The armoured reserves he had so desperately wanted positioned forward were still held back, requiring Hitler's direct order for their release. Precious hours, vital for a decisive blow on the beaches, had already been lost, consumed by delays and the weight of strategic disagreements. Rommel's efforts to repel the invasion were immediate, but the formidable challenges he had foreseen were already dictating the course of events. With the Allied foothold firmly established, Rommel's command during the Battle for Normandy became a protracted exercise in grim defence. The battlefield was characterised by a relentless, grinding attrition, a stark contrast to the fluid, rapid movements of his earlier campaigns. The Bocage country, with its dense hedgerows and sunken lanes, had transformed the landscape into a maze of small, brutal engagements, often fought at close quarters. A pervasive and decisive factor throughout this period was the overwhelming Allied air superiority. German movements, whether of troops, supplies, or armoured vehicles, were constantly harassed and often destroyed from above. This ceaseless aerial assault effectively crippled any large-scale German counter-offensives, forcing Rommel's forces into a largely static defence. The freedom of manoeuvre, a cornerstone of his military philosophy, was entirely absent. Day after day, the German forces were slowly but inexorably worn down. Reinforcements were scarce, and those that did arrive often suffered heavy casualties before even reaching the front lines. The logistical challenges were immense, with supply lines constantly interdicted. Rommel, accustomed to aggressive, decisive action, found himself presiding over a losing battle, a slow, quiet descent into despair. He toured the front lines frequently, witnessing firsthand the heavy losses and the deteriorating morale of his troops. The optimism that had once fueled his audacious strategies had faded, replaced by a quiet, sombre recognition of the inevitable outcome. The Battle for Normandy was not merely a military defeat. It was a profound personal and strategic disillusionment, confirming his earlier, stark assessments of Germany's precarious position. As the relentless battle for Normandy continued, a profound disillusionment began to settle upon Erwin Rommel. His earlier, more robust faith in the German leadership, and specifically in Adolf Hitler, started to erode under the weight of unheeded warnings and overwhelming strategic realities. The chasm between the propaganda from Berlin and the grim truth on the ground became ever wider and more apparent. He observed firsthand the catastrophic impact of Allied air superiority and the inability of the German High Command to adapt effectively. The repeated refusal to grant him the necessary resources or strategic flexibility in Normandy, coupled with the increasingly unrealistic orders emanating from Hitler's headquarters, solidified his growing conviction. It became clear to him that the war, from a practical military standpoint, was irrevocably lost. This realization brought with it a quiet moral struggle. Rommel was a soldier, deeply committed to his duty and to Germany. Yet, he could no longer reconcile this duty with the leadership that he now perceived as recklessly leading the nation to utter ruin. The sacrifices of his men, often in futile defensive actions, weighed heavily upon him. He began to express in hushed tones to trusted subordinates his deep concern for Germany's future under a regime that seemed determined to fight to the last man, regardless of the cost. The belief that the Nazi leadership was fundamentally flawed and morally bankrupt, rather than merely strategically misguided, slowly crystallized within him. His personal loyalty, once unwavering, now fractured under the immense pressure of undeniable facts and a dawning sense of ethical responsibility. Amidst the deepening gloom of the Western Front, a clandestine movement within Germany was reaching its desperate climax. On July 20th, in 1944, a group of high-ranking military officers and civilians attempted to assassinate Adolf Hitler at his Wolf's Lair headquarters in East Prussia. This event, known as the July 20th Plot, sought to overthrow the Nazi regime and negotiate a separate peace with the Western Allies, thereby saving Germany from total destruction. Rommel's connection to this conspiracy was indirect, yet significant. While he was not an active participant in the planning or execution of the bomb plot, some of the conspirators, particularly Karl Heinrich von Stülpnagel and others in the military leadership, had considered him a potential figurehead for a post-Hitler government. They believed his immense popularity with the German people and his reputation as a professional soldier, untainted by party ideology, would lend legitimacy to their cause. Yet Rommel himself was aware of the discussions and the general sentiment among certain officers that Hitler needed to be removed. He had expressed his own profound disenchantment with the Führer and the war's direction. However, his precise level of commitment to the conspirators' aims remains a subject of historical debate. Some accounts suggest he favoured Hitler's arrest and trial rather than assassination, fearing the chaos that a sudden death might unleash. This presented a quiet moral dilemma for Rommel: to actively participate in treason or to remain loyal to an increasingly destructive regime. His knowledge of the plot, however tangential, placed him in grave danger, as the Gestapo's subsequent investigation would prove to be ruthless and far-reaching. The shadow of suspicion began to fall upon him. Just 3 days before the attempted assassination of Hitler, a separate and equally critical event irrevocably altered Rommel's fate and the course of the Normandy campaign. On July 17th, 1944, as the relentless Allied air superiority continued to dominate the skies over France, Rommel was travelling by staff car on a road near Sainte-Foy-de-Montgomery, returning from a visit to the front lines. The journey was a common part of his daily routine, moving between various command posts to personally assess the unfolding battle. Suddenly 2 Royal Canadian Air Force Spitfire fighter bombers, part of the continuous Allied air patrol, spotted his vehicle. The pilots, Flight Lieutenant Charlie Fox and Flight Officer J.R. Smoky Stovall, swooped down, their cannons opening fire. The attack was swift and brutal. Rommel's car was strafed, and the driver, attempting evasive manoeuvres, lost control. The vehicle careened off the road, crashing into a tree. Rommel was thrown from the vehicle, sustaining severe injuries. He suffered fractures to his skull, an eye injury and multiple concussions, leaving him unconscious and gravely wounded. He was immediately transported to a field hospital and later moved to a larger facility for more extensive treatment. This unexpected and violent turn of events effectively removed him from command at a moment of profound strategic importance. The quiet irony of fate in this incident was stark. Rommel, the master of mobile warfare, whose campaigns had often relied on swift movement and surprise, was incapacitated by a sudden, random act of aerial combat. At a time when the German resistance in Normandy desperately needed his leadership, his physical presence and his strategic acumen, he was rendered utterly helpless. His active participation in the defence of France and any potential role in the unfolding political drama of the July 20th plot was abruptly and decisively curtailed by this single, unforeseen attack. While Rommel lay recovering from his severe injuries, the aftershocks of the July 20th plot reverberated throughout the Third Reich. The Gestapo, Hitler's secret state police, launched a quiet yet relentless investigation, a vast and terrifying dragnet designed to uncover every individual even tangentially connected to the failed assassination attempt. This investigation was characterized by methodical interrogation, often under duress, and a chilling determination to eradicate all perceived enemies of the regime. As the network of conspirators was unravelled, names began to surface under the intense scrutiny of the Gestapo. Among those implicated were individuals who, in their desperate planning for a post-Hitler Germany, had considered Rommel as a potential figurehead for a new government. General Karl Heinrich von Stülpnagel, the military commander in France, was one such figure. Under interrogation, Stülpnagel, who had been a key contact for the conspirators in the West, mentioned Rommel's name. Another critical piece of evidence emerged from the captured papers of Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, the man who had placed the bomb. These documents contained lists of potential government members for the envisioned post-coup administration, and Rommel's name appeared within these lists, sometimes as a proposed head of state or a crucial military leader. These were not direct accusations of active participation in the bomb plot itself, but rather indications that Rommel was seen by the conspirators as a sympathetic figure, someone who, due to his immense popularity and his increasingly critical stance on Hitler's leadership, could lend legitimacy to their cause. The accusations levelled against Rommel were therefore not of direct involvement in the physical act of assassination, but rather of a deeper complicity, that he had knowledge of the conspiracy, that he had expressed sympathy for its aims, and that he was willing to play a significant role in a post-coup government. For the Gestapo and the increasingly paranoid Nazi leadership, such implications were sufficient to mark him as a traitor. The quiet accumulation of these testimonies and documents began to form a case against the Desert Fox, even as he slowly recuperated from his wounds, unaware of the tightening net. On the morning of October 14th, 1944, a sombre procession arrived at Herrlingen, at the Rommel family home. Two high-ranking officers, General Wilhelm Burgdorf and General Ernst Meissel, both emissaries of Hitler, stepped from a staff car. Their demeanour was grave, their purpose chillingly clear. They had come not to offer comfort or commendation, but to present Erwin Rommel with an ultimatum, a choice that would determine not only his fate but also that of his family. The generals retreated with Rommel into his study, where the conversation, though unrecorded, was relayed by Rommel to his wife and son immediately afterward. And Burgdorf presented the grim findings of the Gestapo investigation, detailing the accusations of Rommel's alleged involvement in the July 20th plot. The evidence, he stated, was overwhelming, and Hitler had personally decided on Rommel's fate. The choice offered was stark and brutal. Rommel could choose to commit suicide, and in doing so his death would be publicly attributed to his lingering injuries from the strafing attack. He would be granted a state funeral, and his family would receive his pension and be protected from the Gestapo's retribution. His reputation, in the eyes of the public, would remain untarnished. The alternative was a public trial before the Volksgerichtshof, the People's Court, a tribunal notorious for its summary judgments and brutal sentences. Such a trial would inevitably expose Rommel's alleged connections to the conspirators, dragging his name through the mud of public condemnation and almost certainly leading to his execution. Furthermore, his family would be subjected to the full wrath of the regime, facing imprisonment, torture, or even death. a common practice for the relatives of those deemed traitors. Rommel was thus faced with an agonizing decision. He understood the implications immediately. To refuse was to condemn his beloved wife, Lucy, and his son, Manfred, to a horrific fate. To accept was to end his own life, to die by his own hand rather than at the hands of his former leader. The weight of this choice, the quiet calculation of sacrifice, was immense. The generals waited, impassive, for his decision. Rommel, a man who had faced down tanks and artillery fire without flinching, was now confronted with a moral and personal crucible far more profound than any battlefield challenge. Having made his agonizing choice, Rommel emerged from his study, his face pale but resolute. He explained the situation to his wife, Lucy, and his son, Manfred, with a quiet dignity, sparing them no detail of the terrible bargain he'd struck. The news, though anticipated to some degree, struck them with profound sorrow. There were no grand pronouncements, no dramatic farewells, only the quiet, crushing weight of an irreversible decision. Rommel then turned to his son, giving him a few final instructions regarding the family's affairs and urging him to be strong for his mother. He spent a few precious moments alone with Lucy, their parting undoubtedly filled with unspoken grief and the deep affection of a lifetime together. The knowledge that this was their last embrace, their final conversation, settled heavily in the hushed rooms of their home. At approximately 12:45 p.m., the staff car which had brought the two generals was ready. Rommel donned his Afrika Korps leather jacket and stepped out, accompanied by Bergdorf and Maisel. He paused briefly, turning to look back at his family one last time, a silent goodbye etched into his features. Then he entered the car, taking the front passenger seat. The vehicle departed, driving slowly out of the family's driveway and onto the quiet road. It proceeded for only a short distance, perhaps a few hundred meters, before pulling over to the side. What transpired next was swift and private. According to Bergdorf's later account, Rommel was handed a cyanide capsule. He ingested it, and within moments the potent poison took effect. The Desert Fox, the legendary field marshal, died silently in the back seat of a staff car, far from the roar of battle. The two generals returned to the Rommel home shortly after, bearing the news of his death. The official story, meticulously crafted by the regime, was that Rommel had succumbed to the severe head injuries he had sustained months earlier during the strafing attack in Normandy. This narrative was carefully maintained, allowing for a state funeral and the preservation of his public image, fulfilling the terms of the cruel choice. In the quiet aftermath of Rommel's death, the German propaganda machine moved swiftly to control the narrative. The official announcement, near as a broadcast across the nation, stated that Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had succumbed to injuries sustained in a recent enemy air attack in France. This carefully constructed falsehood served a dual purpose. It preserved the image of a loyal, heroic figure for public consumption, and it masked the regime's ruthless elimination of a potential dissident. A state funeral was decreed, a grand spectacle designed to honour a national hero. The event was meticulously orchestrated to convey a sense of profound loss and patriotic mourning. On October 18th, 1944, a solemn procession moved through the streets, accompanied by military honours and the sombre strains of funeral music. The coffin, draped with the swastika flag, was borne by high-ranking officers, while wreaths from Hitler and other senior figures adorned the hearse. The funeral itself was held in Ulm, Rommel's birthplace, a city now quietly observing the final rites for its most famous son. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, a respected senior officer, delivered the eulogy. His words spoke of Rommel's exceptional courage, his tactical genius, and his unwavering dedication to the German cause, carefully omitting any hint of the true circumstances of his demise. The speech resonated with the public, who genuinely mourned the loss of a commander they had come to admire. For the vast majority of the German populace, Rommel's death was a tragic loss, another casualty in a war that was increasingly turning against them. They believed the official story, and their grief was sincere. They saw a hero, a man who had brought moments of glory to a struggling nation, now fallen in the line of duty. Yet, for those few who knew the truth, Rommel's family, the generals involved in his final moments, and the highest echelons of the regime, the elaborate funeral was a chilling performance. It was a public display of honour that concealed a private act of coercion and murder. The quiet deception allowed the regime to maintain its facade of control, even as it eliminated figures who might challenge its authority. The hero's farewell was, in reality, a final act of suppression. As the Second World War drew to a close and the Nazi regime collapsed, the carefully constructed edifice of propaganda began to crumble. The truth about many of the regime's deceptions, including the circumstances surrounding Erwin Rommel's death, slowly started to emerge. With the liberation of Germany and the subsequent investigations into Nazi crimes, unjustice witnesses began to speak, and hidden documents came to light. One of the earliest and most significant revelations came from Rommel's own family. His wife, Lucy, and his son, Manfred, who had been present on that fateful day in October 1944, were finally free to recount the true story. Their testimonies, given to Allied investigators and later to historians, painted a stark picture of coercion and forced suicide. They described the arrival of the two generals, the tense conversation, and Rommel's quiet, agonizing decision to sacrifice himself to protect his loved ones from the Gestapo's wrath. Further corroboration came from surviving members of the German resistance, and those who had been close to Rommel in his final months. Their accounts confirmed his growing disillusionment with Hitler and his awareness of the plot against the Führer, even if his direct involvement in the assassination attempt remained ambiguous. The narrative shifted from a hero fallen in battle to a victim of the regime he had once served. This unveiling of truth initiated a profound historical re-evaluation of Erwin Rommel. No longer simply the Desert Fox, the brilliant but loyal commander, he began to be seen in a more complex light. His quiet defiance in the face of tyranny, his ultimate sacrifice to protect his family, and his implication in the resistance movement transformed his public image. The post-war era sought to understand not only his military genius, but also his moral choices, his entanglement with a criminal regime, and his eventual tragic end. This process of re-evaluation would continue for decades, shaping his enduring legacy. In the decades following the Second World War, as West Germany sought to re-establish itself and integrate into the Western world, a particular historical narrative began to take root. This narrative, often referred to as the clean Wehrmacht myth, aimed to portray the regular German armed forces, the Wehrmacht, as largely separate from the ideological crimes and atrocities committed by the Nazi regime and its more overtly political organizations like the SS. Within this evolving narrative, figures like Erwin Rommel played a crucial role. His image was carefully cultivated to support the idea of an apolitical, honourable soldier who fought a clean war, adhering to traditional military ethics and remaining untainted by the Holocaust or other war crimes. Rommel's perceived professionalism, his chivalrous conduct in North Africa, and his eventual implication in the plot against Hitler made him an ideal candidate for this historical construction. He was presented as a soldier's soldier, focused solely on military objectives, detached from the genocidal policies unfolding elsewhere. This portrayal emphasized his tactical brilliance and his humane treatment of prisoners, often contrasting it with the perceived barbarity of the Eastern Front. The myth suggested that while the Nazi leadership and the SS were responsible for unspeakable horrors, the Wehrmacht, under commanders like Rommel, simply performed its duty as a professional army. This perspective offered a comforting national narrative for many Germans, allowing them to reconcile with their past by compartmentalizing the guilt. However, a careful historical analysis reveals a more nuanced reality. While Rommel himself was not directly implicated in the Holocaust or the systematic atrocities committed on the Eastern Front, his command operated within the larger framework of a regime driven by racial ideology. The Wehrmacht as an institution was an integral part of the Nazi war machine, and its members, including its generals, were aware of, and often complicit in, aspects of the regime's criminal enterprises, even if they did not personally participate in every atrocity. The clean Wehrmacht myth, therefore, served to simplify a complex history, selectively highlighting certain aspects while downplaying others in a quiet effort to reshape national memory. Beyond the historical re-evaluations and the complexities of the clean Wehrmacht narrative, there remains an enduring and powerful legend surrounding Erwin Rommel, that of the Desert Fox. This moniker, initially bestowed upon him by the British press during the North African campaign, captured the imagination of both allies and adversaries, embodying a particular perception of his military prowess and character. The legend of the Desert Fox is built upon several pillars. Central among them is his reputation for tactical genius. His daring maneuvers, his ability to exploit weaknesses, and his seemingly intuitive understanding of desert warfare created an image of a commander who could outwit and outmaneuver his opponents even with limited resources. Accounts of his swift advances and unexpected attacks contributed to this almost mythical status, portraying him as a master of mobile warfare. Equally significant to the legend is the perception of his chivalry and respect for his adversaries. Stories circulated among Allied soldiers of Rommel's humane treatment of prisoners, his discouragement of unnecessary cruelty, and his personal courage often leading from the front. These anecdotes fostered a unique admiration, even among those he fought against. Winston Churchill himself famously acknowledged Rommel's skill and honour in a speech to the House of Commons, further solidifying this image of a clean opponent. This legend was actively cultivated and sustained not only by Allied admiration but also by German propaganda during the war, which sought to present Rommel as an idealised national hero. After the war, his memoirs and the writings of his former staff further cemented this image, emphasising his professionalism and detachment from Nazi ideology. The enduring power of the Desert Fox legend lies in its ability to transcend the more unsettling aspects of his historical context, presenting a romanticised vision of a brilliant and honourable warrior. It speaks to a universal fascination with military leadership and the human capacity for skill and daring, even amidst the grim realities of conflict. Despite the enduring legend of the Desert Fox and attempts to portray him as a purely apolitical soldier, Erwin Rommel's historical legacy is undeniably marked by significant controversies and criticisms. These aspects require careful consideration to construct a complete understanding of his life and actions. One of the primary points of contention revolves around his service to a regime that perpetrated immense crimes against humanity. Rommel was a high-ranking officer in the Wehrmacht, the armed forces of Nazi Germany. While there is no evidence directly implicating him in the planning or execution of specific atrocities, his service lent legitimacy and military strength to a criminal state. The question remains as to the extent of a military leader's moral responsibility when fighting for such a government, regardless of their personal involvement in its worst excesses. Furthermore, Rommel's acceptance of numerous honours and promotions from Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party is a matter of historical record. He received the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords, and diamonds, the highest military decoration in Germany at the time, and directly from Hitler. He also enjoyed a close relationship with the Führer in the early years of the war, benefiting from Hitler's patronage and support. These accolades were not merely military recognition. They were bestowed by a regime that openly espoused racist and expansionist ideologies. His willingness to accept these honours and to allow himself to be used as a propaganda figure presents a complex picture. The extent of Rommel's knowledge of Nazi atrocities, particularly the Holocaust and the brutal treatment of civilians and partisans in Eastern Europe, also remains a subject of historical debate. While his primary operational theatres were North Africa and Western Europe, where the nature of the conflict differed from the genocidal war in the East, it is difficult to imagine a high-ranking officer in the German military being entirely unaware of the regime's broader criminal policies. Historians continue to examine available evidence to understand what he knew, when he knew it, and how, if at all, this knowledge influenced his perspective. These criticisms do not diminish his tactical abilities, but compel a broader ethical assessment of his historical role. Erwin Rommel ultimately stands as a figure of profound complexity, resisting any simple categorization. To understand him fully requires acknowledging the multiple facets of his life and career, rather than attempting to fit him into a singular, unambiguous mould. He was on one hand an undeniably brilliant tactician, whose innovative use of mechanized forces and keen understanding of terrain earned him widespread recognition, even from his adversaries. His campaigns in North Africa demonstrated a strategic mind capable of achieving remarkable results with limited resources, securing his place in military history. Beyond his professional prowess, Rommel was also a devoted family man. His letters to his wife, Lucia, reveal a deeply personal side, filled with affection, concern, and a longing for domesticity amidst the harsh realities of war. These correspondences offer a glimpse into his private world, portraying a man who valued his relationships and found solace in the connections to his home and loved ones. This aspect of his character stands in contrast to the ruthless image often associated with military command. Yet, this same professional soldier, celebrated for his tactical genius and cherished by his family, had served a regime that was morally bankrupt and committed unspeakable crimes. Rommel's commitment was to the German army, an institution he believed in, and to his duty as a soldier. This professional dedication, however, placed him in the service of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party, a choice that irrevocably ties his legacy to the darkest chapter of the 20th century. He was not a politician, nor an ideologue in the mould of many Nazi leaders, but his military actions directly supported their war aims. His life thus presents a paradox: a man of admirable personal qualities and military talent, whose career was inextricably linked to an abhorrent political system. This duality makes him a challenging figure for historical assessment, and demanding a nuanced perspective that embraces the contradictions rather than attempting to resolve them with simplistic judgments. His story compels us to reflect on the nature of duty, personal conviction, and moral responsibility in times of profound societal upheaval. Beyond the controversies and the legends, Erwin Rommel's military legacy endures, primarily through his innovative approaches to warfare. His campaigns, particularly in the North African desert, demonstrated a profound understanding of maneuver warfare in a new era of mechanized conflict. Rommel was among the first to fully grasp the potential of combined arms tactics, integrating tanks, artillery, and infantry into cohesive, fast-moving units that could strike with overwhelming force and then quickly disengage or reposition. His emphasis on speed and surprise became a hallmark of his command. Rommel believed in maintaining the initiative, constantly seeking to outflank and disorient his opponents rather than engaging in static attritional battles. This aggressive doctrine, often executed with audacious risk-taking, allowed numerically inferior German forces to achieve significant victories against the better-equipped Allied armies for extended periods. He understood that psychological impact, created by rapid advances and unexpected attacks, could be as decisive as material superiority. Rommel's operational methods, though ultimately unsuccessful in the broader context of World War II, continued to be studied by military academies and strategists long after his death. His writings, most notably Infantry Attacks, originally published in 1937, became a foundational text for understanding the principles of offensive action and leadership on the battlefield. This work, drawing on his experiences in World War I, laid out his philosophy of leading from the front, observing the terrain directly, and adapting to rapidly changing circumstances. Even today, military thinkers analyze Rommel's campaigns to extract lessons on leadership, logistics in challenging environments, and the effective deployment of armoured formations. His influence can be seen in the development of post-war military doctrine, particularly in the emphasis on agility, rapid deployment, and the coordinated use of diverse military assets. Despite the moral complexities of his service, his tactical genius remains a subject of serious academic and professional interest within military circles globally. Erwin Rommel's image has transcended the historical record, permeating popular culture in various forms. His strategic exploits and the romanticized notion of the desert fox have made him a compelling character for portrayal in film, literature, and even video games. These depictions have often shaped public perception, sometimes more powerfully than academic historical accounts. In cinema, Rommel has been a recurring figure, frequently presented as a noble adversary, a brilliant but tragic hero caught within the machinery of a brutal regime. Films such as The Desert Fox, The Story of Rommel, from 1951, starring James Mason, played a significant role in cementing this image. These portrayals often emphasized his military prowess, his perceived chivalry, and his eventual disillusionment with Hitler, thus contributing to the narrative of a clean Wehrmacht general who fought honorably. The focus was typically on his tactical genius and the drama of his desert campaigns, rather than on the broader political and moral context of his service to Nazi Germany. Literature, too, has explored Rommel's life and campaigns, ranging from biographies to fictionalized accounts. Many of these works, particularly those written in the decades immediately following the war, contributed to the legend of an apolitical soldier, a master of strategy untainted by the regime's ideology. This narrative allowed for a simplification of history, presenting a figure who could be admired for his military skill without confronting the uncomfortable truths of his association with Nazism. The quiet power of narrative in shaping historical understanding cannot be overstated. Through these cultural interpretations, Rommel became more than just a general. He became a symbol. This symbol has evolved over time, with more recent portrayals attempting to introduce greater nuance and acknowledge the complexities and controversies surrounding his life. Yet, the romanticized image of the desert fox persists, demonstrating how deeply cultural representations can embed themselves in the collective consciousness, sometimes overshadowing the intricate realities of historical figures. In contemporary Germany, Erwin Rommel occupies a particular and often debated space within the national historical memory. His legacy continues to be a point of quiet, ongoing discussion, reflecting Germany's profound and complex relationship with its own past. Unlike figures unequivocally celebrated or condemned, Rommel remains a subject of nuanced re-evaluation. The post-war decades saw a tendency to view Rommel through the lens of the clean Wehrmacht myth, portraying him as a professional soldier who simply did his duty, detached from the ideological crimes of the Nazi regime. This perspective was, in part, a way for a nascent West Germany to find figures of national pride that were not completely tainted by the catastrophe of the Third Reich. However, as historical scholarship advanced and societal understanding deepened, this simplistic view came under increasing scrutiny. Today, the debate centres on the extent of his complicity and the implications of his high-ranking service. While his military talents are rarely disputed, the focus has shifted to his unwavering loyalty to Hitler for much of the war, his acceptance of lavish gifts and promotions from the regime, and the moral compromises inherent in serving such a state. There is a growing emphasis on acknowledging that even a chivalrous general operated within a system built on genocide and aggression. This ongoing discussion is not merely academic, it has practical implications. Street names, barracks, and monuments bearing Rommel's name have been subjects of public debate, with calls for renaming or contextualization. These discussions highlight Germany's commitment to confronting its history honestly, even when it involves dismantling cherished yet flawed national narratives. Yet Rommel's place in modern Germany thus serves as a quiet barometer of the nation's evolving historical consciousness, a constant reminder of the difficult work required to truly reconcile with the past. The life of Erwin Rommel, viewed through the calm lens of historical reflection, brings forth profound and quiet questions about morality, duty, and the individual's responsibility during times of immense conflict. These are not questions with immediate or straightforward answers, but rather invitations for contemplation, echoing softly across the decades. Rommel was a man of his time, steeped in the Prussian military tradition, where duty to the state and obedience to command were paramount virtues. For much of his career, these principles guided his actions, allowing him to excel as a soldier. Yet, his story unfolds within the shadow of the Nazi regime, a government that systematically violated every moral code imaginable. This juxtaposition forces an examination of where a soldier's duty ends and individual moral accountability begins. One might ponder the degree to which a military professional focused solely on tactical success can remain truly apolitical when serving a deeply ideological and criminal state. Was Rommel's dedication to his craft, his pursuit of victory on the battlefield, a form of implicit endorsement or a necessary detachment for survival? The quiet observation of his trajectory reveals a man who, while not directly involved in atrocities, nevertheless lent his considerable talents and prestige to a regime that perpetrated them, or his eventual disillusionment and the tragic circumstances of his death also invite reflection. Did his realization of Hitler's destructive path come too late? What constitutes resistance in such oppressive circumstances, and what are the personal costs? These are not questions of judgment, but rather of understanding the immense pressures and moral quandaries faced by individuals caught in the machinery of a totalitarian war. Rommel's life, therefore, serves as a poignant historical case study, quietly prompting us to consider the enduring weight of moral choice amidst the tumult of history. Erwin Rommel, as he truly lived, and the figure he became in popular imagination, represent two distinct entities, separated by the quiet yet profound chasm between historical fact and pervasive legend. The man was a dedicated officer, an innovative tactician, ambitious and often brilliant in his military endeavours, yet also a servant of a horrific regime, whose moral compass, though perhaps troubled, did not prevent his participation in its wars of aggression. He was a complex individual, shaped by his era, his profession, and his personal choices, culminating in a tragic end. The myth, however, is a different creation entirely. It is the desert fox, the chivalrous and clean Wehrmacht general, a figure detached from the broader ideological evil of Nazism, a romanticized warrior admired by friend and foe alike. This myth was born from early Allied propaganda, nurtured by post-war narratives seeking to differentiate segments of the German military from the SS, and solidified by captivating films and books that prioritize dramatic storytelling over nuanced historical truth. The quiet power of storytelling, whether in historical accounts or fictionalized narratives, possesses an immense capacity to shape perception. It can distill complex realities into digestible forms, sometimes sacrificing accuracy for impact. In Rommel's case, the myth offered a comforting narrative, allowing for admiration of military skill without confronting uncomfortable moral entanglements. It provided a convenient hero, easily understood and admired, overshadowing the discomforting questions his actual life raises about duty, complicity, and the nature of a warfare under an authoritarian state. Understanding Rommel requires a careful discernment between these two forms: the historical man, with his successes, failures, suspect, and compromises, and the legendary figure, a product of collective memory and cultural needs. The gap between them is a reminder that history is not merely a collection of facts, but also a constant process of interpretation and re-evaluation, where the echo of a life can transform into a legend that speaks volumes about those who tell the tale. The North African desert, a landscape of immense scale and stark beauty, remains an enduring backdrop to the story of Erwin Rommel. Its vastness, stretching horizon to horizon under an often relentless sun, witnessed the peak of his military renown. The wind, ceaselessly shifting the sands, now whispers over battlefields long since quieted, carrying only the faintest echoes of the conflict that once raged across its dunes and rocky plateaus. In the profound silence of that desert, one can almost discern the ghostly presence of the DAK, the distant rumble of tanks, the hurried commands, and the strategic maneuvers that defined Rommel's most famous campaigns. El Alamein, Tobruk, Gazala. These names are not merely entries in history books, but are intrinsically tied to the very dust and heat of that environment. It was here that his reputation as the Desert Fox was forged, a moniker that speaks as much to the cunning and adaptability demanded by the terrain as it does to his tactical genius. The desert, impartial and enduring, holds these memories within its ancient expanse. It absorbed the sweat, the hopes, and the fears of the soldiers, both Axis and Allied, who fought upon its surface. For Rommel, it was both a stage for his greatest triumphs and ultimately a crucible that revealed the limits of even the most determined will against overwhelming odds and logistical realities. His connection to this landscape is indelible. Even as the sands continue their slow, silent march, they retain an invisible imprint of the history made there. The desert, in its timeless indifference, allows for reflection on the human drama played out within its boundaries, and in its vast empty spaces the enduring legacy of Erwin Rommel, the man inextricably linked to its unforgiving beauty, continues to resonate. The journey of Erwin Rommel, from his beginnings as a quiet German boy in Heidenheim to his final, forced quietus, unfolds as an intricate tapestry. It is woven with threads of personal ambition, the immense pressures of historical circumstance, and the profound complexities of moral choice. His early life, marked by a fascination with engineering and a steady ascent through military ranks, gave little indication of the global stage he would one day command. His story became inextricably linked with the tumult of the 20th century, particularly the two world wars that reshaped Europe. In the crucible of these conflicts, Rommel emerged as a figure of remarkable military talent, celebrated for his innovative tactics and leadership in the field. Yet, this celebration is tempered by the inescapable context of the regime he served, a regime that cast a long, dark shadow over the very concept of military honour. His life, therefore, stands as a testament to the difficult position of individuals caught within grand historical forces. He was a man dedicated to his profession, a soldier who inspired loyalty, yet he operated within a system of profound moral corruption. The decisions he made, the loyalties he upheld, and the eventual disillusionment he experienced collectively paint a portrait of a figure both admirable in certain respects and deeply compromised by his era. As the narrative of his life concludes, a quiet contemplation settles. Erwin Rommel's legacy is not simple. It is a blend of strategic brilliance and a cautionary tale about duty without full moral discernment. His journey invites us to consider the enduring questions of courage, complicity, and the difficult paths individuals navigate when history demands extraordinary, often painful choices. The narrative of Erwin Rommel, much like all historical accounts, is not a static artifact. It is a living story, continuously examined, re-evaluated, and understood through the evolving lens of time and new perspectives. Each generation, in its own quiet way, grapples with the complexities of the past, seeking meaning in the lives that preceded them. Rommel's journey from a young officer in the First World War to a celebrated, then ultimately tragic figure of the Second, serves as a quiet reminder of the profound and often unforeseen impact individuals can have on the trajectory of history. His military brilliance, his tactical acumen, and the charisma that inspired his troops are undeniable aspects of his story. Yet, these elements are inextricably bound to the larger, more unsettling narrative of the era in which he lived and the regime he served. His life illustrates the intricate interplay between personal agency and the overwhelming forces that shape human destinies. The choices he made, the loyalties he cultivated, and the moral compromises he faced all contribute to a complex portrait, far removed from any simplistic hero worship or outright condemnation. It is a story that encourages a deeper consideration of the human condition under duress. As we gently bring this exploration of Rommel's life to its conclusion, we are left with a sense of enduring contemplation. His legacy is not merely a collection of battles won or lost, but a testament to the persistent human endeavour to navigate duty, ambition, and conscience amidst the grand, often turbulent currents of history. And so, the quiet examination of his story, like all history, continues to unfold, inviting further reflection long after the final words are spoken. Erwin Rommel's life leaves a distinct historical footprint, extending beyond the tactical maps and battlefield manoeuvres that defined his military career. His enduring presence in history is not solely as a master of armoured warfare, but as a quiet case study within the broader human narrative, a chronicle of leadership, the stark realities of conflict, and the profound weight of moral choice in extraordinary times. His innovative application of manoeuvre warfare, his daring leadership, and his ability to inspire loyalty among his troops have secured his place in military academies and strategic discussions worldwide. Yet, the true depth of his historical significance lies in the complex questions his story provokes. Rommel's journey compels future generations to quietly consider the intricate relationship between individual genius and institutional complicity, between professional duty and personal conscience. His experiences offer a sombre lens through which to examine the pressures faced by military leaders serving under morally corrupt regimes. The Desert Fox image, while captivating, ultimately gives way to a more nuanced understanding of a man caught in the tempest of the 20th century. His life becomes a quiet testament to the enduring human struggle to reconcile ambition with ethics and loyalty with a sense of universal right and wrong. Thus, Rommel's historical footprint is not merely etched in the annals of military strategy. It is also found in the quiet, reflective spaces where history's lessons are pondered, a constant, gentle reminder of the profound complexities inherent in leadership during times of profound global upheaval and the lasting echoes of moral decisions. As we quietly reflect on the life of Erwin Rommel, we are reminded of the immense weight of history itself. Each individual story, no matter how grand or how seemingly small, contributes to the vast interwoven tapestry of human experience. When examining figures like Rommel, whose lives were so deeply entwined with monumental global events, the importance of a calm, factual understanding becomes paramount. History is not a static monument, but a living, breathing narrative, continuously shaped by new discoveries, fresh perspectives, and thoughtful re-evaluation. It requires patience, a steady hand, and a commitment to observation rather than immediate judgment. To truly comprehend the past, we must resist the urge to simplify complex lives into neat categories of hero or villain. Instead, we are invited to sit with the ambiguities, to acknowledge the shades of grey, and to understand the context that shape choices and actions. The quiet, continuous process of historical inquiry serves not to condemn or to glorify, but to illuminate. It seeks to understand the forces that drive individuals, the environments that constrain them, and the enduring human struggle to navigate a world often beyond their control. Rommel's story, like so many others from the tumultuous 20th century, stands as a gentle reminder of this ongoing endeavour. It encourages us to approach the past with humility and a deep appreciation for its intricate lessons, allowing the quiet weight of history to settle, informing our present and perhaps guiding our future. The concept of legacy often conjures images of grand monuments or definitive judgments, yet for a figure like Erwin Rommel, its true meaning is far more subtle and enduring. His legacy is not merely a tally of military victories or even a record of his personal choices, but rather the continuous stream of questions and discussions his life continues to provoke across generations. It resides in the ongoing dialogue, the quiet contemplation, and the evolving understanding that his story inspires. A legacy, in this deeper sense, is a living thing. It is the way a life, once lived, continues to resonate through time, challenging our assumptions and prompting us to examine universal themes. Rommel's life compels us to consider the nature of duty in times of moral crisis, the allure of charismatic leadership, the burden of command, and the often blurred lines between personal conviction and institutional loyalty. His military prowess is undeniable, yet his legacy extends beyond tactics and strategy, reaching into the more profound territories of ethics and human fallibility. His story invites reflection on how individuals navigate immense pressures, how reputations are formed and reformed, and how the passage of time can strip away simplistic narratives to reveal a more intricate truth. The questions Rommel's life raises about accountability, about the clean soldier in an unclean war, about the choices made under duress, are not easily answered, nor are they ever truly resolved. And it is precisely in this unresolved quality, in the persistent invitation to ponder and discuss, that the true depth of his legacy lies. It is a quiet, continuous echo, urging us to look beyond the surface and to engage with the enduring complexities of the human past. Throughout this extended journey through the life of Erwin Rommel, our intention has been to remain a quiet observer. We have sought to present the unfolding narrative with a steady hand, allowing the facts and the documented events to speak for themselves without the interjection of overt judgment or dramatic embellishment. The aim has always been to foster a calm space for historical contemplation, where the intricate tapestry of a past life can be gently unfurled and examined. The history we have explored, like all history, is a complex and layered phenomenon. It resists easy categorization and simple moral pronouncements. Instead, it invites a deeper, more patient engagement. By maintaining this observational distance, we hope to have provided an environment conducive to quiet reflection, where the mind can consider the nuances of a bygone era without the urgency of immediate conclusion. The lives of historical figures, particularly those entwined with monumental global events, are rarely straightforward. They are mosaics of decisions, circumstances, and consequences, often viewed through the prism of subsequent understanding. Our role has been to illuminate these pieces, to trace the chronological path, and to present the available evidence with a consistent, soothing rhythm. As this narrative draws to a close, the aim is not to leave a definitive verdict, but rather a sense of quietude and perhaps a broadened perspective. The intricate pathways of history continue to exist, inviting further thought and individual consideration long after the final words are spoken. May the journey through these historical currents have offered a tranquil passage, allowing for a peaceful contemplation of the past and a gentle transition into rest.